blood plasma, scorpion venom, and single malt whiskey are some of the most expensive resources in the world. But the liquid at the end of this video could cost up to $13 million per liter. Here's a list of the most expensive liquids we've ever covered on Business Insider.
52,000 ceramic jars hold a Japanese black vinegar, known as gurozu, that can only be made in this part of the world. One batch can take up to 5 years to age, and brewmasters, like Kenji Tachiwada, keep track of the quality by checking the taste, sound, and smell.
黒酢これはですね、作るには、子供のですね、子供を育てるような気持ちで、やっぱり、仕込んだ時がまだ赤ちゃんで、今度収穫する時はもう成人、立派な成人になって世の中に送り出すという。
One bottle can cost at least double the price of a regular mass-produced rice vinegar. Chefs across the country seek it out for its smooth and mellow taste.
黒酢は日本の調味料の中でも大切な一つの調味料として使用しております。
Sakamoto Kurozu is one of 8 vinegar breweries in the southern Japanese town of Fukuyama that still use this 200-year-old fermentation method. But ramping up production is nearly impossible because it's difficult to find more land to lay out jars. We travelled to Fukuyama, Japan, to see how this ancient method of making black vinegar is still standing. Kenji starts his work at the Sakamoto Kurozu facility at 8 a.m. He's been working here for the past 40 years.
非常にこのやりがいのある仕事で、楽しんでおります。今は醸造部といってですね、仕込みから、黒酢を仕上げるまでですね。
Brown rice is one of only 3 ingredients in kurozu. Workers harvest it from nearby fields.
これは私がですね、生まれ育った地元で採れたお米です。
They steam the rice and mix it with a mold that's also used to make sake and soy sauce. This is called goji, and it's the first ingredient to go in the jar.
いわば、黒酢を作るための原動力になる麹なんですね。
Genji fills up the rest with plain steamed brown rice. It makes the vinegar less tangy and acidic. Then, he fills the pot with around 9 gallons of fresh water from a natural spring.
麹の、働きを活性化させるために地下水を入れます。
A final layer of koji goes on top. It will later turn into a thick slab of mold that protects the vinegar from other microbes entering the mixture. Master brewers usually fill the jars up in the spring and fall, when the temperatures are just right.
やっぱり、先ほど言いましたけど、温度が非常に大事でありまして。
This specific region has the perfect climate to make kurozu because of its relatively warm weather year-round. The natural outdoor heat accelerates fermentation. Over a 3 to 6 month process, the mold turns the rice starch into sugar, then into alcohol. As the vinegar ages, it turns darker and richer in taste. It takes at least 3 years to reach its signature brownish hue. Genji checks all 52,000 pots to keep track of the aging.
最初に感じるのは匂いなんですね。最初の発酵の時に甘い香りがするのを確認した時にはすごく大丈夫だな、これで安心だなという気持ちです。これはもう1年前になっております。香りとか、それから色とか、それから味とかですね。それで判断していきます。
Each pot ages at its own pace, but most reach the dark brown colour in 3 years. Kenji selects a few to ferment for up to 5, and those are the most expensive.
壺の蓋を開けるとですね、ほんのりと甘く感じます。その後にですね、ブクブクと音がいたします。最初は音がポコッポコッポコッという音がするんですが、もう少し発酵が進んできますと、ガーッという激しい音に変わります。
The company sells vinegar at all stages of aging. These ceramic pots also play an essential role in the process. Their dark exterior absorbs heat from the sun, and the porousness of the clay allows the mold to keep fermenting. Sakamoto Kurozu has been buying them from Chinjukan pottery for the past 200 years, and they last for centuries. The company still has about 1,000 original pots from 2 centuries ago.
黒酢の亀は、何千個も作ってますね。
Chinjukan is a 15th generation potter running the 420-year-old family business.
ここの焼き物は坂本の黒酢とはもう江戸時代から、長い付き合いですね。
People have been making black vinegar in Fukuyama since the 1800s. In the early 20th century, there were about 24 kurozu makers here, but many closed their doors during World War II when the government implemented food rations and restricted brewers from using rice. Sakamoto Kurozu managed to stay afloat by briefly substituting sweet potatoes for rice. Today, it's one of only 8 kurozu businesses left. It's also one of the largest, covering 35,000 square meters, the size of more than 6 American football fields. Akihiro Sakamoto is the 6th generation to run the family business.
私は祖父がですね、非常に私は小さい頃から非常に苦労して手間がかかるんですけれども、黒酢作りやっぱり時代とともに形を変えながら未来永劫残していけるように頑張っていきたいと思っています。
It also has a restaurant on site where visitors can taste the vinegar.
坂本黒酢の違いは、店頭で売られている安いお酢とは全く製法も原料も違うので、全然違う商品となっております。まろやかでコクのある風味が出ています。
Junichi Honda studied the best way to use vinegar in his dishes. Like miso and soy sauce, rice vinegar is one of the basic seasonings used in Japanese cuisine. It's usually aged for 3 months, and some can be ready in just days with modern technology. Kurozu's years-long natural process gives it a milder and less acidic taste than regular rice vinegar. The restaurant's sweet and sour pork is the most popular item on the menu.
こちらが自家製の1年ものの黒酢となっております。主に火を使う料理で使用しております。こちらの黒酢を少し火を入れて使用することによって黒酢の風味、コクが増し、さらに美味しい酢豚に仕上がります。
A 1,000 milliliter bottle of kurozu costs around $20. That's double the price of standard mass-produced rice vinegar. The older it is, the more expensive it becomes. But Akihiro is not worried about cheaper competitors. Japan's Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries certified kurozu with a geographical indication in 2015. That means authentic kurozu can only be made here in this region using these techniques, just like champagne can only be produced in a certain region of France. And nowadays, Akihiro has chefs and customers from across the country seeking his vinegar year-round. The company expanded its line to include vinegar-based products like jam, ponzu sauce, and flavored drinks.
でさらにそれを今度坂本の黒酢を原料にして今の時代に合った商品開発をしてですね、
Customers buy kurozu for its supposed health benefits like weight loss, lower cholesterol, and increased energy. Studies suggest people who use it regularly see benefits, but usually when paired with other healthy lifestyle habits. But there's no simple way of expanding. Most of the land in Fukuyama is already taken, and moving the business somewhere else would mean losing the geographical indication. The company also needs a flat area to lay out pots, and the terrain here is hilly and steep. And there's no way of accelerating the natural fermentation process or changing the size of the pots. So for now, he's making as much as the 52,000 pots can produce.
このビジネスはなくなることはありません。この黒酢の製法では今のところライバルはありません。
And none of that is possible without veteran brewmasters like Kenji, ensuring that the quality is top-notch.
私は黒酢作りを長年やってますが、すごくこのやりがいのある仕事なんで、自分の子供たちにもですね、やってほしい、継いでほしいという気持ちはあります。
This is what palm oil looks like. Our local palm oil. I actually prefer to cook with red palm oil because of the taste.
Red palm oil has a mildly floral flavour and a buttery texture.
Palm oil generally is used for our local food. All the time, all the time, all the time.
Here, in Ondo State, Nigeria, making this local favourite is a labour-intensive and artisanal process. Thousands of fleshy palm fruits are transformed into yellow-brown sludge and then red-orange oil. Over the course of a week, it all starts on oil palm plantations like this one in the village of Aye. Every few weeks, expert climbers are called in to harvest the palm husks. The trees here can be as high as 60 feet. Climbers like Victor don't wear any protective gear, relying on just handmade harnesses and axes to help them up the palm trees.
And this is our rope, and I think they cut it.
Victor makes new ropes with fresh palm fibres whenever he feels his current one isn't strong or tight enough. This is important because old rope can become brittle and snap.
And sometimes, some people they use their life. See my own now. With another people, they will see they use it. Don't sit now, it don't hold, and don't they break. You are the clown. Gentle, gentle, no rush. Use my ass. Go hook up for your itch.
It takes 3 years for oil palm trees to bear fruit, but once they do, they can be harvested year-round.
Sometimes they call 200. Well, if person won't learn this work, I feel teach am well. All these things, I no go gree make this rope grow up. Go clean am comot. Now, where I wan cut it now. See it now.
The biggest obstacle Victor faces once he's climbing is snakes.
Or if you carry your hand, say one cut, that snake go touch your rope and that person go fall.
The risk of falling has led some workers to stop climbing and instead help with collecting the palm husks from the safety of the ground.
I need a climb tree because before they climb this banga, as this banga they so danger deal. As if you climb, if you go there, you go see snake for up.
It's very difficult to separate the fresh fruit from the thick, spiky palm husks. So they're left out to dry. This time also allows the fruit to ferment, which elevates the oil's flavour. After 3 or 4 days, the fruits are ready to be dehusked. Randy and other workers use axes to break the husks and sift the fruits to separate them from dirt. They collect the fruit in large sacks and transport it to a processing site in the nearby village of Ireze. Randy delivers the palm fruits to his wife, Deborah, who is one of the many workers toiling away to transform the fruits into red palm oil. The sacks of fruit are dumped into buckets and large drums.
As it is, so for that one drum, in a better agree could they see 2 1. So like this, you don't ferment, sell like this. If you don't ferment it, like some people, if they sell like this, they say you don't rot, you don't rot you.
Water is added to the drums to boil the fruit.
I go pour water, but make the water not too much. I get up about what I tell the mayor water put. No, we know the test them. We are local. So we know they test any decoration. No, we know they add chemical.
After 1 hour, the fruit is ready to be drained and taken to the miller.
Yeah, now inside this drum, they boil. See the water, it don't change. The one they do before, if they don't go cut them for farm, if we don't pick and finish, it gets more people we don't do by ourselves. We don't carry cement. Do them very well. Now there they go, if they don't cook and finish, now there, they go the match am with your legs.
But the mill still involves a significant amount of labour, as someone must manually load and empty the fruit. After the mill, it's time for another recently acquired machine. A hydraulic press. The fruit, which has been milled into a pulp, is pressed to release its oil. No kernel oil is released here because that would require the seeds to be dried and cracked. Some locals do produce kernel oil, but since it's more difficult to make without special machinery, it's not as common. While oil palms originated in West Africa, colonization led to the rapid expansion of oil palm plantations throughout Southeast Asia. Eventually, Southeast Asia took over the global palm oil industry, and as other oils also grew in popularity, West Africa never quite caught up. West Africa's rainy season, which typically lasts from May to October, is also an ongoing issue.
Rainy season, if rain fall, if you climb a tree, means maybe you don't plan, you want to kill yourself. Because you know good man, you go climb when rain fall, the pantry go they draw.
So when it's raining, no one is climbing the trees, which means the fruit often goes rotten. And thanks to climate change, the rainy season has been lasting longer, causing more damage. This decreases the already low supply of palm fruits and raises the price of red palm oil. In contrast, palm kernel oil plantations harvest on a massive scale and rely on heavy machinery for the bulk of their production.
But you get work, we dey suffer for this thing. Government, I no see government where come support me. I no get any support. I must say they suffer with my children, with my wife, with my friends.
Our engine, our mainly engine. We don't get money to buy big one or the one we go give us guarantee say this one we fit use and like 5 years we no go disturb us. So now it.
After enough oil has been collected in the large bowls underneath the press, workers carefully scoop the orange-red liquid into other bowls and buckets. The oil is poured into drums for a final boil. After 1 hour, the fire is put out and the oil is left to cool off. The finished oil is moved into buckets, then funneled into jerry cans. Deborah says some customers travel all the way from Lagos State, which is about 5 hours away by car, to buy her red palm oil.
Some people think I do more than 15 cake, 30 litre.
These kegs sell for $30 each. Although the price can change depending on the supply of palm fruits.
I know they appeal. Now I know they carry my oil, they go market. I dey sell am for my house. I get plenty customer.
The price of red palm oil can also vary depending on location. A 4-litre bottle at a supermarket in a bigger city like Lagos can cost around $18, making it the same price or even cheaper than some imported vegetable oils, thanks to Nigeria's volatile exchange rates. Meanwhile, the red palm oil that is exported outside of West Africa is exponentially more expensive, ranging from $15 to $20 for 1 litre in the US, and the cost may only be getting higher. Cooking oil prices have been on the rise thanks to weather-related supply shortages in countries like Argentina and Canada. The Russian invasion of Ukraine also cut the world off from the region's supply of sunflower oil and led Indonesia to ban some exports of its palm oil. All this raised the global price of cooking oils even higher. As a result, the local cost of red palm oil in Nigeria has also increased, but for many people, the price is worth the taste.
Our own, I believe in my own oil, you say, it better. The price, I dey expect say me they don't tell me say don't they go up more, because they work, no dey easy.
While coconut has a long tradition of use in food and medicine across Asia, its oil is the most valuable byproduct. Here in the Philippines, where over 44% of the world's coconut oil is produced, coconut trees thrive in a long, dry season. But even with a bounty of coconuts at your fingertips, assuming you can climb high enough, the process of extracting the oil isn't easy. Each coconut has a layer of husk surrounding its shell that must be removed by hand. Only then can it be cleaved in half with a special tool called a bolo knife.
So after grating mo na tong ato na siyang pug-on using our expeller machine. Then human sa expeller, so nakakolekta na ta sa cream. Ang cream ato siyang i-ferment for 12 hours sa usa ka table, iset nato siya diha for 12 hours.
In the Philippines, 14.8 million metric tons of coconuts were harvested in 2019 alone. And these were used to make around 1.6 million metric tons of oil, much of it exported to the US or Europe. And by the time the coconut oil reaches the Western market, the price for the product will have roughly doubled. Even with the ideal growing conditions for the trees, coconut oil has grown so popular that farmers in the Philippines struggle to meet the demand. In recent years, the market for coconut oil has surged in the West alongside a cultural shift towards the search for natural, unprocessed products. And coconut oil manufacturers were quick to capitalize on the sensation. Consumption peaked in the US in 2009 at 598,000 metric tons, and coconut oil quickly became the mascot for a healthy lifestyle as celebrities and bloggers adopted the product. Proponents of coconut oil as a cure-all remedy say that it can promote weight loss, improve blood sugar, and even slow the progression of Alzheimer's because of its high levels of antioxidants. But so far, all scientific studies on the health benefits of coconut oil have been inconclusive, and nutritionists remain skeptical. Some nutritionists say coconut oil could actually do more harm than good. Coconut oil is composed of 80% to 90% saturated fatty acid. In 2017, the American Heart Association issued an advisory against saturated fats and specifically warned that coconut oil increases cholesterol and should be avoided. And soon after, the wholesale price of coconut oil dropped by more than half. But it's a dip that hasn't lasted, and coconut oil's price is once again rising rapidly. The oil has become a key ingredient in many products, perhaps most recently alternative meats. Both Beyond and Impossible burgers are reliant on coconut oil, and their surging popularity has increased demand. But while coconut oil's popularity shows no sign of slowing, there's a looming problem for the coconut supply. Some estimates say as many as 90% of all coconut trees in Asia are nearing the end of their productive cycle. The majority of coconut plantations across the Philippines were planted 40 or 50 years ago, and many of the trees are now producing as little as 10 coconuts a year, rather than the 100 to 150 a healthy tree might.
So 250 ka lubi makahimo ta og 10 liters of virgin coconut oil. So kani nga lubi gikuha nit nato sa 12 ka punuan nga lubi. So ang lubi nga inani nga mo mature ato na siyang harvest on every 3 months or quarterly.
And the 10 liters that come from all of these coconuts would only fill up about 21 16-ounce jars of coconut oil that you'd likely find at a supermarket. Given it takes about 10 years for a new coconut tree to fruit, planting new trees is going to be crucial to keep up with this soaring demand. But despite these problems, the market is poised to grow by $518 million before 2024.
Camel milk may not be quite as popular as cow milk. Compared to the 600 million metric tons of cow milk produced worldwide, only about 3 million tons of camel milk are produced each year. However, camel milk is an important staple across Africa and the Middle East, and some cultures rely on it. Somalia and Kenya alone produce 64% of the world's camel milk. Camelicious in Dubai has over 6,000 camels on its farm and produces 4 million litres of milk each year.
And as you know, the people in the Middle East connected with the camels for transport and for food. And their main diet was camel milk and dates. So it's a long history. The demand for camel milk increasing day by day, and we are facing now a challenge which to meet the demand because the supply is less than the demand.
This demand has kept the price high, and camel milk's profile as a new health food has boosted sales. It's slightly lower in saturated fat, has 10 times the vitamin C, and has more calcium and potassium than cow's milk. These benefits have led many people to start using it as an alternative medicine, despite very limited evidence. Online celebrity endorsements have also led more and more people to try it. While new camel farms are appearing across the world, the popularity is still limited. And in Europe, there are still 12,000 cows for every single camel. But even if you do have a lot of camels, it's not exactly easy work to get the milk.
Roughly we are milking 1,300 camels twice a day, so it's a very intense work. Lots of people are included into the job. So when camels are arriving here, they go through a very strict quarantine procedure where we check them for different diseases. Whenever needed, we treat them, and we start training them for the milking parlor. It's very crucial that we provide a very relaxed, very calm atmosphere for the camels during milking to be able to release the milk. So we had to train the camel to be able to milk them without the calf. So that was a very intensive work, and every camel is different. So for some camels, the training itself for the milking parlor takes 2-3 days, but for some camels it took weeks.
Once this training period is over and your camels are producing milk, you still don't get anywhere near as much as you would from a cow.
One cow can give around like 50 liters per day, while the camel milk can give 6 to 7 liters. The cows in 3 years will give more than 50,000 liters, while in the camels in 3 years you will get maximum 4 to 7,000 liters.
Unlike the dairy industry, where male calves are often killed and disposed of, every camel must be kept near its young to continue producing milk, meaning that 2 animals will need to be kept fed and healthy to produce just 7 liters of milk each day.
Camel milk is costly. In addition to that, the feed cost. We are here at Camelicious giving our camels natural and fresh alfalfa hay, in addition to wheat bran only. We are not giving any concentrates or any feed additives.
So after all this work, what does the milk actually taste like?
Smells like milk. Yeah, it does have a different taste to it.
It's a bit salty, I would say, saltier than normal milk, but it's quite creamy.
I don't hate it. It's almost like salty.
I would say it doesn't taste like regular milk. I would have it again.
As this milk grows in popularity, and selective breeding leads to camels that produce more milk, the price may come down. But for now, camel milk remains an expensive luxury.
Camel is a different species, so we didn't want and still don't want to turn them into a milking machine because we are thinking long term. So we would like to have a long production life here with these camels on this farm.
Making aloe products takes quick hands.
La penca, que siempre, según va saliendo la penca, ya echan su espina.
A good knife.
Diariamente tenemos que filetear alrededor de 3,000 a 3,500 pencas cada empleado.
And lots of plants. It takes about 20 aloe leaves to make just 1 gallon of aloe vera juice. But some aloe products have been found to contain no aloe at all.
It's so easy to put out a fake aloe product, so there are all kinds of synthetic gels.
So how are real aloe vera products made? And can we spot the legit stuff in a $625 million industry? We visited the largest aloe farm in the world to find out. Universal Aloe's farm covers 5,000 acres here in the Dominican Republic. While there are hundreds of types of aloe plants, this farm chose Aloe barbadensis Miller because it has 20 amino acids.
Minerals, vitamins, carbohydrates, hormones, and other bioactive substances.
Once the baby plants are in the ground, it takes about 8 months for them to mature. About 750 people harvest these fields. They're dispatched in groups, harvesting section by section.
Siempre uno le quita la penca que están llena y uno la corta y le quita la punta, le quita las espinas. En la parte de abajo es en el tronco, como digamos. O sea, le cortamos las pencas maduras, yo la agarro penca por penca para no maltratar la mata, la que va a quedar.
The cut leaves won't grow back, but the plants will grow new ones. It will take them about a week to harvest just this one area.
La caloría, el sol es demasiado fuerte, porque es lo difícil de este trabajo, pero uno ya está acostumbrado a aguantarlo, porque son cosas que uno lo necesita.
One by one, workers pick up all the harvested leaves and toss them into a truck. Those leaves head to a processing plant 2 miles up the road.
Aquí llega diariamente 260,000 libras de pencas frescas, como le expliqué en la finca. Y eso es convertido diariamente en 20,000 galones de jugo fresco para exportación. El proceso se inicia con el lavado y desinfección de la planta.
The leaves go through a bath of chlorinated salt water to kill off any little critters from the field that may be hanging around. Then they get trimmed.
Se remueven junto con la cabeza y la cola para que la penca quede en situación de poder ser extraído el filete en el área de fileteado. Y luego se da un segundo lavado.
This jiggly fillet is the gel inside the aloe leaf. That's what's used in real aloe vera juice, gel, or skincare products.
Nosotros utilizamos la mano de obra humana para sacar el filete de la hoja de aloe vera.
To do it, they need a really good knife.
Yo lo apodo el rayo, porque cuando yo lo cojo, yo siento que voy rapidísimo con él. Ella hace trabajo solo por mí.
They might make it look easy, but filleting takes precision.
También tiene que estar exactamente en el punto para poder sacar el cristal del aloe bien y perfecto. Mayormente hay mucha diferencia. Cuando viene la sábila grande se siente bien porque uno rinde más, pero cuando viene la sábila pequeña uno pasa mucho trabajo para filetearla y se siente como débil, se le va el deseo a uno de trabajar.
And they have to move fast, filleting 3,500 leaves a day.
Los fileteros más rápidos somos muchos y a veces nos ponemos a echar competencia para saber mayormente cuál es más rápido y somos muchos los más rápidos que hay.
Many aloe companies use machines for filleting.
El proceso de producción que llevamos a cabo aquí es muy artesanal. Alrededor del 80% de todo nuestro proceso es manual, porque hay mucho menos desperdicio y porque la planta nuestra, la hoja es muy irregular en su morfología.
The leftover leaf bits go back out into the field as compost, and the buckets of fillets, those get weighed, then poured onto this big table. Workers here will inspect them for any leftover leaf bits, which they'll then slice off. Once it's all clear, the fillets head to the shredder, which grinds them into a pure aloe gel.
Y desde aquí pasan hacia estos serpentines de pasteurizado o UHT. Se eliminan cualquier tipo de impurezas y de bacterias que pudieran tener el jugo.
At this point, ascorbic acid is added to extend the shelf life.
Nuestro producto es 99.9% aloe vera puro y el otro 0.1% es ácido ascórbico.
The gel flows into this spill-proof bag.
Estas dos cabezas robóticas son las que se encargan de coger la tapa de la funda metalizada, abrirla, llenar la funda y cerrarla automáticamente sin que haya ningún contacto con el medio ambiente.
This bag is then vacuum sealed and put into a bigger metal box. The whole process from leaf to this container takes only about 3 hours. But before this shipment can leave the factory, its contents have to be tested for quality assurance.
Alrededor de 20-25 muestras diariamente.
Hay un análisis que es el físico-químico. En el físico-químico analizamos lo que es el pH, la viscosidad, la parte de color, textura y todo lo concerniente a la apariencia del jugo como tal.
Me toma alrededor de 1 hora hacer este tipo de análisis.
Only when a container passes the lab tests can it be released for shipment. These ones are bound for Rotterdam in the Netherlands. There, the gel will be pumped into bottles for forever living products. But not every bottle of aloe is made like this. In 2015, ConsumerLab.com tested 10 aloe products for ingredients.
Half of them failed our tests.
A 2016 Bloomberg investigation found that Walmart, CVS, and Target's aloe products contain no evidence of aloe at all.
It's so easy to put out a fake aloe product. So there are all kinds of synthetic gels. Often you'll see the word like carbomer is a synthetic gel. And if you see a clear gel, you have no idea if it's really aloe or carbomer.
Most aloe products aren't closely regulated by the FDA. That's because they're considered supplements or cosmetics, not drugs. So a product can say it contains aloe, but it could mean a range of things. It really does contain aloe fillet, or it's the whole leaf ground up, and not just that inner fillet. Or it's a synthetic gel, and there's actually no aloe, which won't hurt you, but doesn't have any of the supposed benefits of aloe.
There's not a lot of regulation or oversight of aloe products.
It's also hard to regulate because aloe grows naturally, all over the Americas. And its gel has been used for thousands of years to heal burns and reduce inflammation.
The challenge is translating that history to our current rigorous medical examinations.
Another problem is there isn't clear scientific proof of aloe's healing powers. Some studies have shown it helps soothe burns and speed up healing, while others show no effect on burns.
So it's not that aloe doesn't help. The evidence isn't there right now.
The outer rind of the leaf has been found to have a laxative compound called aloin. One study found that it caused cancer in rats, while another found it helped with constipation. But the FDA has banned aloe from being sold as an over-the-counter laxative drug.
There's no patent on aloe, and so there isn't a lot of incentive for companies to be putting lots of money into clinical studies.
They don't really need to do those studies to get these products on the shelf.
Still, consumers worldwide are flocking to aloe as they embrace more natural products. Universal Aloe saw a 30% increase in demand in 2020. As consumers navigate this growing market, how can we identify the products made with real aloe vera? Well, Todd says it's actually really tricky, but he did have a few suggestions. First, you should always check the ingredient list.
You want to see aloe, you want to see its first. You really need to be super careful on the wording because if it just says leaf, it could be any part of the leaf. You could be getting the latex, which you don't want unless you want a laxative effect.
Look out for tricky wording like 100% gel. That could mean there is 100% gel, but not all of it is aloe fillet.
So you really need to know what part of the leaf is being made. When they say aloe gel, is it a gel that's made from blending up the whole leaf, or is it truly just pure aloe gel?
Despite these uncertainties, experts don't expect the demand for aloe to dip anytime soon.
When someone hears shea butter, it's likely they think of the West African variety. But in East Africa, a different kind of shea nut grows, a subspecies called Nilotica. The West African paradoxa tree is farmed, so it grows more abundantly. But Nilotica isn't typically planted. It grows in the wild in East African countries like Uganda and Sudan. East African shea butter can cost more than double the West African alternative. That's because it's easier to spread and absorbs quickly into the skin.
This is our Nilotica. Very low melting point. Like you see, when I spread, it easily melts. And within a few minutes, it will have sunk into my skin pores. But when we come to our West African shea butter, when you spread, this is how it turns out. It will remain on top because of the waxy texture.
That makes Nilotica more desirable for cosmetics companies, which use it for butters, oils, and soaps. And according to Lucy, this is one of the reasons demand for East African shea butter has grown both locally and abroad. In Uganda, Nilotica producers are trying to meet the growing demand. Akello and her peers have been harvesting shea fruits since 5 a.m. They're part of the Corner Adware Moya Women's Group, a self-help group for women in Uganda. In Uganda, shea producers are primarily organized women's groups like this. They start their day early so they can pick the best fruits before other groups come. Akello and the other harvesters pick the fruits off the ground once they've already fallen. Then they remove and eat the fruit to reveal the shea nut. They eat it because they won't need it to make the butter, and it's delicious. Quality control starts here, with only the best shea nuts moving on to processing. These are grade A nuts, which are whole, undamaged, and untouched by insects. The nuts are then dried in the sun for a few days to reduce moisture. Next, they're carefully cracked, and the kernels are dried again for 2 weeks. Now Akello can make the shea butter. It's usually done one of 2 ways, by hand or by machine, both requiring heavy manual labor. Making shea butter by hand is an intensive process. After the nuts dry the second time, producers heat ash over a fire for 30 minutes. Then they roast the shea nuts in the ashes for another 45 minutes, stirring constantly. This helps prevent mold and deactivates free fatty acids, or FFAs, which are harmful to the body. But they have to be careful. Too much heat could lead to a dark oil with high, rather than deactivated, FFA levels. Then the women spread the nuts on the ground to cool off. Producers grind the nuts 3 times. They take turns pounding, then muddle the mixture further between rocks. And finally, refine the mixture in a mill. This creates a paste, which they pour into hot water. Here, the oil they need for the butter separates from the paste.
Tedo nien kayini kerikeni oni boli yikenu kitiene e kayin pe te beru rubu kayin pe beru rubu beru nye we ko tin we ko nyore titi yuti chukene ti rubu wa ko mo mer te bera tik ka mo mer bera tik pe shamer dang pe chatte.
The oil is removed and packaged for sale locally, where a kilo costs over $5. It's mainly used for cooking, but locals also use it on their skin. And while it's still pricier than West African shea butter, this heat-processed butter is a more affordable alternative to cold-pressed Nilotica. 1 kilo of cold-pressed East African shea butter can reach $12 in Uganda. and when exported, it's over 4 times that price. That's because cold-pressed shea butter is more refined. It's the cleanest way to extract the oil, which preserves the nut's properties. After harvesting, drying, and grinding the shea nuts, producers place them in cloth bags and load them into a cold-press machine. They've had this machine since 1997. To use it, 2 people need to push each side of the lever in a circle, pressing and releasing the oil from the fat in the shea nuts. When left to rest, the oil hardens into shea butter. From nut to butter, the whole process can take 3 weeks. Today, producers prefer the cold press method because they can make bigger batches of high-quality shea butter. It can also enhance some of the butter's most desired properties. Studies of Nilotica have found that it has significantly higher oleic acid content than West African shea butter. It also has lower stearic acid content, which contributes to the softness of the butter.
This is the West African shea butter with a high melting point, and when it solidifies, it's really hard.
Harder textures are more difficult to integrate into cosmetics. Lucy says that's why Nilotica has the upper hand in cosmetics. Her American buyers prefer it because it absorbs faster into the skin. But Nilotica has other special properties.
The demand at the moment is growing because of these contents, the olein, vitamin E, and then it has antioxidants that make it easy, especially for cosmetics. It has to have a healing factor within it.
This growing demand is being met with limited supply.
The supply is a little lower because the number of producers is still a bit low.
The shea tree fruits only once a year, and producers are still figuring out how to bulk their harvests. And while some efforts are underway to farm more shea trees, the nuts are primarily harvested in the wild, limiting producers further. Then there's deforestation. According to the Ugandan National Forest Authority, the country has lost 63% of its tree cover in the past 25 years. Locals use the wood for charcoal, firewood, and timber. But Nilotica producers hope that as demand continues to grow and locals learn more about Nilotica's value, they'll work to preserve the trees, and in turn, scale up production of East African shea butter.
Some of the people who make mezcal in Mexico have been doing it the same way for centuries. And now more people than ever want to drink it. Mezcal's value increased by 50% in 2021, making it the fastest growing spirit in America. Now, the US market for mezcal is bigger than Mexico's. But even as international popularity grows, some producers are getting squeezed out of the industry. And some can't even call their spirit mezcal anymore. Getting a certification can take up to a year and cost thousands of dollars, and producers say it's getting in the way of long-held traditions. So some, like Graciela Angeles Carreño, now label their bottles distilled agave.
Si mezcal es lo que yo hoy día veo que es, no me interesa llamarme mezcal, porque cualquier payaso puede hacer mezcal.
We head to Oaxaca, Mexico to see how master mezcaleros harvest, cook, ferment, and distill agave. While mezcal and tequila are both made from agave plants, mezcal actually predates tequila and has a distinct smoky flavor. Mezcal gets its name from the Aztec word mexcali, meaning agave roasted in the oven, but it's nicknamed the elixir of the gods. Because, as the legend goes, in pre-Columbian Mexico, a lightning bolt hit an agave plant, creating mezcal. For most of mezcal's history, it was a drink of the lower class.
Que era una bebida de pobres, de campesinos, de gente no educada.
Graciela's family has made mezcal in the town of Santa Catarina, Minas since 1898. But unlike her ancestors, she grows her agave, or maguey as it's known locally, from seeds.
Es como un cascabel. Y así es como aparecen las semillas.
While other companies may prefer root cuttings to speed up the process, Graciela uses this slower method so the agave can stand up better to diseases.
Son plantas de un ciclo largo y que solo podemos aprovechar una vez en su vida.
After anywhere from 7 to 35 years, the agave is ready to be harvested, all by hand.
Quizás los expertos lo hacen como en unos 15 minutos. ¿Sale, Goyo? Al ataque.
First, they remove the leaves. Then they slice off the thorns on the tip and side of each leaf. Because if those thorns accidentally get under your skin, Graciela's brother says they can migrate, which hurts a lot.
Acá, en esta parte de acá tengo muchas enterradas. Se cree en la época prehispánica que esto usaban para un tema de castigo a ladrones.
Saponins, the chemicals agave leaves excrete, can also be dangerous.
Genera ardor, dolor, o en la piel pues comezón y te genera granos.
But Edgar says the saponins don't bother him.
Yo soy moreno. A las personas de piel blanca les hace más daño que a los morenos. Es la ventaja de ser moreno.
What's left is the agave heart, called the piña, and it takes a ton of effort to unearth it.
Se regresa uno bien cansado, lleno de ronchas, espinado.
Piñas can weigh hundreds of pounds. So workers break them up to make it easier to carry, then haul them onto an awaiting truck bed. But it's still weeks away from becoming mezcal. Remember that earthen oven? Well, the agave hearts first have to get cooked.
Cuando se cocine va a ser muy dulce.
Building the oven is an art form passed down for generations. Workers place stones on top of firewood. The rocks are exposed to a 2,000-degree fire for up to 9 hours, so they get red hot.
Posteriormente, pusimos sobre esas piedras calientes fibra de agave o guarape, ¿no? Que es el resultado de la destilación, es el desecho del proceso. Eso se humedece y se hace una capa, que es como un aislante, para evitar que el maguey toque directamente la piedra, porque si la toca, se quema.
They load the agave hearts on top, big ones first and small ones to follow. They kick and shove each piña into place.
Entre todos están observando cómo arman ese rompecabezas, ¿no?
Next, they shovel more fiber waste on top. Then 2 men toss a canvas over the whole thing. And finally, a layer of soil finishes up the oven, trapping the heat inside.
Cuando ya tuvimos casi toda la tierra arriba, Edgar puso agua y vieron que salió con una potencia como si fuera un volcán. Si tú no acomodas bien el maguey, cuando se pone el agua, se te desbarata, se cae toda la tierra.
A cross is placed on top to bless the batch.
Ahí, en el horno va a permanecer por 5 días.
What's inside the oven smolders slowly, giving mezcal its distinct smoky flavor. For the next step, we head to another distillery called Tres Mezquites, an hour east in San Baltasar, Guadalvilla. Here, Don Goyo has been making mezcal for 40 years. Today, his business pumps out 6,000 liters a year.
Siempre le echo 2 copas por la mañana antes del desayuno.
He and his team move the cooked agave hearts into this molino, or grinder. To crush the agave, a horse pulls this stone, which weighs a whopping 1,000 pounds.
El caballo se llama Satanás. Porque, bueno, ahorita pues el caballo es mansito pues porque él tiene 22 años que está trabajando. Si no más antes, cuando era joven, el caballo está bien arizo. No se deja que otra gente le toca. Lo único el que me deja pues yo soy.
Don Goyo's team uses pitchforks to move the crushed agave fibers into fermentation tanks. Back at Graciela's, they add water to dissolve the sugar. Naturally occurring yeast gets to work eating the sugar and converting it into alcohol. After it ferments for nearly a week, Edgar comes in to check on it.
Entonces hay que levantar primero esto. Ahorita van a salir unos mosquitos que le llamamos mosquitos borrachos. Son nuestros amigos. Les gusta estar entre el alcohol.
He first listens to make sure there's no sound of escaping CO2 bubbles coming from the vat, which could sound something like this.
Ritmo de la fermentación. Si es muy lento, casi está. Y si casi es nulo, ya está listo.
Then he submerges his tester tube.
Se llama probador, es un carrizo que tiene un orificio y tiene que saber a cerveza, sí, cerveza fuerte, como una cerveza negra, como una amarga, sí, pero con alcohol, pues, ¿no? No, todavía les va a faltar mucho. Hoy es día miércoles. Yo le calculo que entre el sábado y domingo lo estaríamos destilando.
When it's ready to be distilled, workers rake the fibers into the stills and add more water. From each barrel, they get about 100 liters of mezcal. The distilling area is known as the palenque. As the agave fibers heat up, the alcohol vapor rises. It travels through this tube, condenses, and drops into an awaiting jug. They'll distill it a second time to get 4 jugs. The first is called the head, and its alcohol content is really high. The next jug is known as the body and has a little less alcohol. The third is the tail, with even less.
Y lo que envasamos como mezcal es el cuerpo. La cola actualmente la utilizamos para enjuagar nuestras botellas.
And finally, the last jug is an acidic residue called enguiche, used to clean the floors. Graciela's team fills 8,000 bottles a year. She sells her brand Real Minero within Mexico and exports it to the US and Europe. But it wasn't until the 2010s that mezcal began seeing interest outside Oaxaca. It popped up in trendy bars in the US and beyond. In response, Mexico's mezcal production jumped 400% in the 6 years leading up to 2020. By then, the US overtook Mexico as the biggest market for mezcal. What was once a poor man's drink had reached global fame.
Y es una carrera que no paró ni siquiera en la pandemia, ¿no? Porque en la pandemia pareciera ser que en vez de bajar, aumentó.
To standardize and regulate the growing industry, the Mexican government got involved. It started in 1994, when the government established a denominación de origen for mezcal, kind of like how champagne can only come from a specific region in France. It was to protect the traditional process of making mezcal and the place where it's made.
Es algo que es muy bueno desde el punto de vista que el consumidor va a tener una certeza de que es un producto que va respaldado.
In 1997, the government appointed an organization now called Comarcom to oversee and enforce the rules for certification. Rules like mezcal had to be made from 100% agave in only these 9 states, and it had to have a certain amount of alcohol by volume and methanol. The DO seems like a great idea to guarantee quality standards across Mexico and keep production inside the country. And at first, even mezcal producers advocated for it. Those new regulations eventually came with a catch. Today, to get certified, producers now have to have time and a lot of money. Mexican lawyer Blanca Salvador says certification can cost anywhere from $375 to $2,500, which is a lot for a small mezcalero like Don Goyo. And the costs don't stop there. Producers have to pay to get their mezcal lab tested and buy all the required equipment.
Entonces no tienen a veces el recurso para eso. Entonces si no lo tienen, no van a pasar la prueba de lo que es la certificación.
And the whole certification process can take over a year.
¿Y qué pasa si nos negaron la marca? Perdimos 6 u 8 meses en poder tener una marca, y si no tenemos una marca, no podemos nosotros vender el mezcal.
For years, going through Comarcom was the only way to get a certification. In 2020, claims of corruption came to light, and the Mexican government fined the organization nearly $50,000 for deceptive and abusive practices. like prioritizing big mezcal companies over small ones. But now, producers fear the DO rules are putting traditions at risk. For one, it's really hard to get a consistent alcohol and methanol content in traditional distilling. So a few large-scale producers have turned to more modern equipment, like steel stills, to guarantee alcohol and methanol. Another concern? Changing name standards for agave, despite generations of indigenous groups using native words for the plant. When Comarcam told Graciela to drop the ancestral name of Quiche on her labels for Mexicano, it was her last straw. So in 2021, she and her family decided to stop certifying their brand, even though their distillation process didn't change.
Porque se vuelve un tema burocrático, un tema político. Y entonces no nos gustó, por eso nos salimos.
Choosing family tradition over regulation, Graciela labeled everything distilled agave.
No dice mezcal, pero es un mezcal.
And other distilleries followed suit. But there's another problem. All that demand has drawn interest from international companies. It's created more competition on top of an already tough certification process. Of these popular brands, none are Mexican-owned. A French company owns Del Maguey, a British company owns Casamigos, and a New York-based company funded El Silencio Mezcal. Even celebrities like George Clooney, Adam Levine, and the stars of Breaking Bad have gotten in on the market. Because of the DO's protection, American companies can't make mezcal in the US. But they are allowed to buy loads of it from Mexican producers, repackage, and resell it for a lot more than what they paid. This system has left traditional producers, even certified ones like Don Goyo, with a dwindling piece of the booming global industry.
No tengo marca porque, bueno, falta de ¿cómo se llama? Del dinero, pues, para ponerle marca.
So he sells his mezcal in label-less plastic bottles to a middleman. Don Goyo earns $15 to $40 per bottle. Casa Cortez, one of the brands that eventually buys Don Goyo's mezcal, resells it for $38 to $100 a bottle.
Compran menos y después ellos lo duplican, pues.
But these ancestral mezcaleros haven't given up hope in their craft.
Lo primero que desearía es que los mezcaleros logremos entender que la palabra no le pertenece solo a algunos, que es una palabra que nos pertenece a todos los mexicanos.
Nowadays, the government has added more certifying agencies to lighten the load of Comarcam. But Blanca thinks it should do more to help producers bottle their own mezcal and streamline the certification process.
Debe, desde mi punto de vista, agilizar los trámites para poderle permitir a los productores pequeños estar en la posibilidad de competir a nivel internacional.
On Graciela's side, she believes the key lies in respecting the agave plant itself.
Me encantaría que todos los que producen mezcal en este país comiencen a realizar acciones para conservar el maguey. Porque si no hay maguey, no hay mezcal. ¿Y entonces de qué sirve el éxito?
Mezcaleros also hope to keep putting tradition first.
Ahora sí que testigos de pues, la intensa lucha que se ha desarrollado para preservar, para conservar, ahora sí que la industria artesanal.
A tradition you can see here. Before taking a sip of a new bottle, Don Goyo pours a bit out, thanking the land for its ancient gift of mezcal.
Entonces, bendiciones para todos los mezcaleros, para todos los maguilleros y para todos los campesinos en general, que pues entregan día a día pues cada gota de sudor, cada esfuerzo que ahora sí que con mucha pasión y entrega pues hacen a que esta industria pequeña pero importante pues sea posible.
Young-Woon and his daughter Sujin are extracting the main ingredient of rice syrup, shikye, a mixture of steamed rice, hot water, and barley malt.
분리 작업하는 것이 가장 힘들어요. 새벽같이 일어나가지고 두 사람이서 짜야 되니까 짜면 그 물을 계속 저으면서 3시간 이상 저으면 아침 8시.
The delicate process behind shikye gives rice syrup an incomparable sweetness, but also brings the price up. A 1 kilogram bottle of artisanal rice syrup can reach $140. So how long does it actually take to make shikye? And is this why rice syrup is so expensive? Young-gun runs a workshop with his daughter Soo-jin in Jangpyeong, South Chora Province, South Korea. In 2000, the South Korean Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs named him the 21st Grand Master for his expertise in rice syrup and rice taffy.
음식을 만드는 데는 기본적으로 간장, 된장, 고추장, 그리고 나면은 조청입니다. 그럼 최고의 밑반찬은 이것이 없으면 한국 음식이 만들어질 수가 없죠. 밑반찬 중에서 조청의 역할은 우리의 단맛도 중요하지만 깊은 맛을 연출합니다, 이게. 그래서 조청에는 항상 그 깊은 맛이라는 게 있어요. 나의 참 인생의 전부라고 해야 됩니다. 왜 그러냐면 내 청춘을 바쳤으니까. 뭐 어렸을 때부터니까 한 6, 70년 이렇게 됩니다.
조청 제조하시는 단계에서 가장 좋아하시는 단계는 뭐가 있을까요?
조청을 만드는 과정에서 가장 좋아하는 건 돈 버는 걸 제일 좋아하겠죠. 이제 그런 정도가 숙련이라기보다도 몸에가 익었죠. 어려서부터 해서 자연스럽게.
The key step in making high-quality rice syrup is to ferment cooked rice with barley malt. The rice ferments for 10 hours under a blanket to minimize temperature change. This sweet solution is called 식게.
이게 이제 식혜가 다 됐거든요. 식혜가 다 된 거를 밥알로 이렇게 확인을 합니다. 이렇게. 그러면 따르르 이렇게 말려요. 밥알이 깨져가지고 이렇게. 이렇게 밥알이 깨지지 않으면 식혜가 덜 된 거예요.
Quicker fermentation methods that use artificial enzymes exist, but the rich, complex flavors produced by Young-gun's longer method are what sets his rice syrup apart from mass-produced alternatives. In South Korea, there is a big difference between artisanal rice syrup made with 식게 and the one made with artificial enzymes. Artisanal syrup can be as much as 3 times as expensive, while premium artisanal syrup like Young-gun's costs up to 6 times as much. To separate the 식게 from the rice, Young-gun and Soo-jin wrap the rice in a hemp bag and then drain the liquid through a bamboo plank.
대나무가 아니고 이만은 물이 잘 빠질 수 있는 그런 나무는 별로 없다. 다 만들었어요, 끈으로. 대나무 비에다가 대밭에서 대나무를 비워요. 대나무를 비워다가 이걸 만드는데 아이 손질이다.
To extract the last drops of 식게, Young-gun and Soo-jin sit on the plank and seesaw on it. They have to work at night if they want to make rice syrup in the morning.
힘들죠. 힘들면 저녁에 2시나 일어나가지고 이제 엿을 짜기 시작하고 그렇습니다. 식혜를 다 됐으면. 잘 때 짜니까 이게 시소를 타요. 이렇게. 그럼 시소를 타게 되면 한 사람이 졸면 한 사람이 넘어져. 넘어지면 나도 같이 넘어지죠. 네, 그게 참 재밌는 에피소드. 또 털어.
Making 식게 is much more than seesawing. It can only be made if the rice is cooked properly.
손으로 딱 쥐면은 딱 뭉쳐져요. 그러면서 조금 있으면 이제 들러붙고 이런 현상이 있을 때 가장 좋습니다.
뚜껑 여세요. 제가 여기 있을게요.
Young-gun and Soo-jin steam the rice in an iron pot. Before pouring the rice, they wrap the pot in cloth to prevent the steam from leaking.
쭉 당기면서 해.
요거 빈틈을 잘 막아야지. 안 그러면 밥이 설리거든요.
아, 이제 피워버려. 쫙 피워버려. 쫙 쏴버려.
The rice cooks for 1.5 to 2 hours. Young-gun and Sujin constantly check the fire to make sure the rice cooks evenly. To make 1 kilogram of syrup, Young-gun needs 5 times the amount of rice.
고소고소해요.
In other parts of South Korea, different types of traditional syrup exist, made from corn or sweet potatoes. But here in South Chora province, rice is an important resource and is the preferred choice to make syrup.
그럼 바로 이 앞에가 우리 논이 있습니다만은 여기서 아침 저녁으로 데려다 보면서 농사를 지은데 쌀 그러면 소비자들은 다 그냥 쌀이에요.
Compared to other cereals, rice is much more difficult to process. To ferment and become shike, it needs this. Sprouted barley. Young-gun cultivates it here on rotation with rice.
내가 엿을 만들기 위해서 보리를 싹을 기르는 것을 엿질금이라 그래요. 조청을 만들기 위해서는 제일 중요한 것이 쌀도 중요하지만 엿기름 기르는 것이 가장 중요하다 이렇게 되죠. 이게 보리의 싹인데요. 이 보리의 싹이 얼마나 컸느냐에 따라 갖고 이 엿기름 가장 좋은 엿기름의 성질이 변해요. 요게 이제 단맛을 좌우하고 식혜나 또 조청의 맛을 좌우하고 질을 좌우하고 그래요.
Young-gun is looking for a length of 1 centimeter to 1.5 centimeters. This length can take up to 10 days to achieve, and the barley needs to be rinsed and checked daily. This is what truly sets apart his rice syrup. Less premium versions of rice syrup are made with shorter sprouts, so the barley hulls can be repurposed after the malt is extracted.
왜 안 기르느냐? 기르게 되면은 보리 몸에 들어있는 양분이 싹으로 다 가버리니까.
Young-gun mixes the barley sprouts with water and, with the help of Sujin, squeezes the barley to extract the malt. After 10 hours of fermentation and a long night of seesawing, the shike is finally ready to be cooked down into a syrup. Young-gun uses a traditional iron pot called a gamasut, which gives richness to the syrup.
가마솥에 오랫동안 끓이게 되면 색깔이 붉어집니다. 그리고 이제 가마솥이 아니고 직화열이라 그러죠. 직화열이 아니고 간접열로해서 끓이게 되면 색깔이 하얗죠. 그래서 직화열을 하게 되면은 가마솥이 제일 좋아요.
A pot like this can cost up to 1 million won.
가마솥은 부모님 때부터 또 할머니 때부터 내가 3대째 하고 있는데요. 내 전수작까지 4대째 합니다. 근데 3대를 계속 이렇게 가마솥에다가 해서 끓여요. 채로 따질 수가 없죠.
Because the pot retains so much heat, Young-gun must monitor the fire at all times, as well as stir the syrup constantly. If something goes wrong and the heat is too strong, the syrup may burn. If stirred too long, its texture will harden.
그러니까 이걸 이제 퍼내야 돼요. 계속 2시간 반 동안 이렇게 저어줘야 됩니다. 왜 젓지 않으면은 바닥에 눌어붙어요. 곡물이라. 또 불이 확 나온다.
세다. 이거 조금 이따가 해야 되는데.
It can take up to 3 hours to reach the right consistency.
이 상태에서 봐요. 이게 이제 이 상태에서 봅니다. 마지막 이 상태에서 물이 똑 떨어지잖아요. 이렇게 똑 떨어지는 상태. 이 상태. 이제 이 상태가 조청으로서는 가장 좋고 여기에서 더 수분을 농축해서 만들게 되면 이제 엿이 만들어요. 색깔은 이렇게 붉으스름한 상태가 제일 좋습니다. 이게 붓지 않으면 깊은 맛이 안 나요.
Just like the gamasut, The container where the syrup is stored is important. This type of pot is called onggi, and a large one like this can cost 750,000 won.
질그릇은 여러 가지 의미도 있지만 자체에서 숨을 쉬는 그래서 자체 증발도 시키면서 공기도 흡수하고 이런 여러 가지 영향도 있겠지만은
While the process is lengthy, customers are recognizing its value and the demand for rice syrup is increasing. Companies outside of South Korea have started making rice syrup, and the global industry is expected to exceed $1 billion in 2032. And while large-scale consumption of processed sugar is hurting rice syrup in the local Korean market, the syrup has gained popularity abroad. In the US, premium syrups can reach $140 per kilogram. But rice syrup is different from other sweeteners.
설탕이나 물엿은 그 순간적인 단맛에 집중하는 그런 그 인공 감미료잖아요. 근데 조청은 깊은 맛을 nem과 동시에 사람 몸을 이롭게 하기 위해서 만든 식재료거든요.
Because rice syrup tastes less sweet than table sugar, you would need larger quantities to match sugar's sweetness when cooking. Rice syrup also has a higher glycemic index, so using it as a direct substitute for sugar could actually do more harm than good.
네, 오늘 조청 잘 됐어요.
But making rice syrup alone isn't enough for workshops like Younggun's to survive. Rice syrup is the main ingredient in hanggwa, a general term for Korean confectionaries.
굉장히 맛있어요. 이렇게 먹으면.
But most of all, the syrup is the base for yut, a type of rice taffy which is in high demand locally. Taffy can be stored for longer than raw syrup can, but it's challenging to make.
아빠가 다 부셨잖아. 조금만 부라니까.
It's boiled for 6 hours, is much stickier than syrup, and must be stretched like this over 30 times. Younggun and Sujin always work in pairs. Here in Tamyang, Younggun is determined to keep the tradition alive.
제가 퍼뜨리면서 이제 기술을 전수하면서 육성하는 농가가 13농가로 출발했는데 지금은 한 50여 농가가 만들어요. 그래서 공장도 3개나 지금 운영을 하고 있고 또 하나 짓고 있고 이렇게 계속 번창해 나가요. 이게 소감이야 이루 말할 수 없죠. 나로서는 개인적으로 굉장히 이 자부심을 갖고 보람으로 느끼죠. 하나는 또 우리 할머니 대에서 어머니대로 또 내가 그 전통 계승을 했는데 우리 전수자가 4대째 또 이어받았다는 것. 그래서 그 전통성을 고수했다는 것에 대해서 아주 자긍심을 갖습니다.
사실은 부모님께 일을 배우는 게 정말 힘듭니다. 이게 왜냐면 이 전통 방식은 정답이 없기 때문이고 그 정답은 저희 부모님만 알고 계시기 때문에 부모님이 하시는 말씀대로 그대로 배워가면서 최선을 다해서 도와서 배울 생각입니다.
These white dots are bugs, and there's a good chance you've eaten them before. Raised on cactuses, they're called cochineals, and the acid in their guts makes a vibrant red dye. It ends up in tons of products, from strawberry yogurt to M&Ms to lipstick. Indigenous people across Latin America traded it for thousands of years. And in the 17th century, it was Mexico's second most valuable export, behind silver. It can be found on the walls of archaeological sites, in priceless paintings, and in the robes of kings. Synthetic dyes and pressure from animal rights activists have pushed some Mexican farms to abandon production altogether. And cultivation of cochineals has been disappearing.
It's a shame because it's the most powerful, brilliant red dye in existence.
This will be the last time Inés Carmona de Gante farms cochineals on her land.
Hicimos todo lo que se pudo.
Others, like Catalina Yolanda Lopez, say they'll do everything they can to keep their production going.
Valorábamos, digamos, la grana cochinilla como un tesoro que nos dejaron nuestros antepasados y que teníamos que lograr que sobreviviera.
But Catalina doesn't know how much longer her family can keep this ancient tradition alive. Cochineal bugs are tiny parasites that live on cactuses. And the stuff that becomes the powerful red dye makes up almost a quarter of their weight. But it's not blood. It's actually a naturally occurring compound called carminic acid that's a repellent against predators like ants. Cochineals eat prickly pear cactuses, or nopales as they're known in Mexico. They have all the moisture and nutrients the bug needs to survive.
Y a otra planta ya no la alimenta.
Catalina's grandmother taught her how to raise cochineals when she was just 4 years old. Today, she's one of the last cochineal producers in all of Mexico, running a farm in Oaxaca. It all starts in her field of young nopales. These baby cactuses are cuttings of older ones.
Un nopal podemos sacar fracciones y multiplicarlo. Cada penca de abajo desarrolla dos, como si fueran conejitos, aquí vemos.
Farmers have to wear gloves to protect against the cactus's needles as they cut off the paddles.
Espinitas de 3 milímetros que se entierran en la piel y que son muy dolorosas. En el cuerpo a veces se me llegan a encajar y como no los puedo buscar, pues se me quedan ahí, que ya parezco nopal.
Next, Catalina washes the cactus with soap and water. Only then can she place the cochineals on the paddles.
Estamos anidando lo que es la grana cochinilla madre, poniéndola dentro de un nido de palma.
These look like finger traps, but they're actually tiny houses for the bugs. Catalina says no one makes them anymore, so she has to be careful not to break them.
Y dentro de 12 horas o 10 horas van a aparecer la grana cochinilla bebé caminando a través de los agujeros de las uniones de la palma.
And once they've spread across the paddle, she hooks in a wire and hangs it up. Now the cochineals can get to munching.
Esto lo denominamos nopaloteca. En lugar de libros acomodados así, tenemos nopales. Aquí está protegida del aire, de la lluvia, del frío, del calor. Y este rack lo inventé hace más de 50 años.
Catalina constantly has to check for predators in the nopal library. Predators like this telero worm.
Y este se come la grana cuando está en estado larvario.
Every white dot you see here is a cochineal.
Tiene un polvo alrededor de ella como si fuera talco o harina.
The white powder acts as a glue to help the insects stick to the paddle. And it protects them against the sun too. Cochineals stick their probe into the cactus skin and suck out the water and nutrients.
Y en eso su cuerpecito empieza a trabajar como un laboratorio, transformando los azúcares en ácido carmínico.
Only female cochineals produce carmine. The males are tiny, have wings, and fly away. But don't call these little guys beetles or cockroaches.
Las cucarachas tienen caparazón, tienen 2 antenas y son muy feas. Y estas son preciosas.
Once stayed over in Puebla, almost all of Carmona's nopal fields will be gone. she plans to replace it with corn and save just a few cactuses to raise cochineals as a hobby. She comes out to weed her fields and brush off any predators.
Las arañas, los bichos.
She looks for the perfect cactuses to bring back to her hungry bugs in the greenhouse.
Puede ser pequeño, puede ser chueco, deforme, pero debe de ser grueso, que tenga alimento.
Caretakers of the cochineals have to constantly move babies to new nopal paddles, and after 3 to 4 months, the female insects are ready for harvesting. Carmona uses a sieve to separate the bugs from their clothes, the powder and silk they make.
Y se queda nada más la grana.
As the dead cochineals dry out, their squishy pods solidify. Carmona sells them whole.
Todo este hilo de acá hasta allá para sacar 3 kilos de grana húmeda y nos queda uno de grana así.
Catalina and her daughter, Claudia Juarez Lopez, use a traditional metate to grind them into a brilliant red.
Es preferible hacerlo a mano, ya que nosotros creemos que es mejor la molienda, es más despacio y el color se concentra más.
Either way, it's very tedious work. It takes 70,000 bugs to make just 1 pound of dye. The powder has to be dunked in an alcohol solution and filtered to remove the insect parts. Catalina sells a kilo of her dried cochineal for about $150.
No es mucho. Así, con todo este trabajo que lleva, tendría un precio de 10,000 pesos por kilo.
Large food brands use carminic acid in everything, from Yoplait strawberry yogurt and Airheads to Nerds and M&M's in the UK. But customers will never taste it.
No cambia el sabor. O sea, la grana solamente tiene puro color.
It appears on the nutrition label as Carmine, Natural Red 4, Crimson Lake, or E120 in the European Union. Carmine is also frequently used in the cosmetic industry. And that use is anything but new. Cochineal dates back thousands of years in Mexico. It was used in lipsticks, textiles, royal headdresses, and wall art like those in the pyramids of Montalban. After Hernan Cortés conquered the Aztecs, he brought cochineal back to Europe. And it quickly replaced European dyes because cochineal fixed onto wool and silk better, lasted longer, and created a more vibrant red.
About 15 times more powerful than anything that had been seen before.
It came to represent power, showing up in the highest of fashion. The Catholic Church used it in its red cardinal robes, and the British Army used it in their red coats. And soon, artists like Van Gogh, Renoir, and Rembrandt were painting cochineals into their masterpieces. In the 1800s, women in the United States started using it to color food, from cakes and candies to jellies and pickled red cabbage. But then in 1856, synthetic dyes were invented, first with mauve, made from byproducts of coal, and then in 1878 with red number 2, made from petroleum.
It was very difficult to compete because they had lower prices, larger volume, and similar qualities.
And these synthetics just about wiped out cochineal production in Mexico. Then in 1976, the FDA banned red number 2 under suspicion it could cause cancer. And so began a renewed interest in natural dyes. But at that point, there were almost no cochineal growers left in the country. Catalina's family was one of just 3 still working with the insects. So she made it her life mission to preserve this bug and teach others about cochineal. She started selling the dye to local artisans and chefs and turned her farm into a museum to lead workshops for people interested in the bug.
Por amor a los insectos. Creo que nuestro corazón está con los insectos, nuestra vida está con los insectos.
But much of Catalina's work has been reversed in the last 2 decades. Brands like the liqueur Campari and Starbucks stopped using Carmine due to pressure from vegetarian customers. The pandemic was another blow. Orders stopped completely for Carmona. And that's when she decided to stop cochineal production.
Se viene la pandemia y se acabó todo.
Last year, she produced 400 kilos of the bug. This year, she expects just 50 kilos.
En 2 meses desaparece el espacio.
She switched this entire greenhouse to tomatoes.
Pues sí necesito algo que me genere dinero.
So can Mexican producers save their cochineal? The answer could lie with Peru. The government started investing in cochineal farming in the 1990s to help boost employment in rural parts of the country. And now Peru dominates more than 80% of the market. American-based liqueur brands have started using it again in place of synthetic dyes. It was even the inspiration for Pantone's Color of the Year. And there's growing demand across the globe. But Peru has some advantages. The country produces a wild kind of cochineal that grows outdoors without much farmer involvement, so it's cheaper. And while Mexican domesticated cochineal have more carminic acid, they also need to be grown indoors to protect from parasites. To be able to deliver large-scale orders from international buyers, farmers like Catalina would have to build more greenhouses and hire labor. But that's too expensive. Catalina had to turn down 2 letters of interest from English buyers because she simply couldn't produce the amount of dye they needed. Experts say investments from the Mexican government could help farmers.
To provide basically seed money to Oaxaca peasant women.
In the meantime, Catalina hopes to keep educating every visitor who stops by her farm.
Creo que hay oportunidad para que esta cultura renazca.
Just like she taught her daughter Claudia, who's won awards for her work with the bug.
Sin el apoyo pues de los hijos, a lo mejor se hubiera ya perdido este trabajo que viene desarrollando mi mamá.
But until investments or customers come, some cochineals will be lost. And Catalina will be here, caring for her bunny cactuses and tiny little bugs.
Y mantener vivo esta especie, que creemos que es un legado cultural del México antiguo.
Today, Captain Gilles and his crew are setting out to catch over 20,000 pounds of something very valuable, anchovies. But once the fish come out of the water, time is of the essence. Since these anchovies stay fresh for only 24 hours, everyone must move quickly to set them on ice and head back to the coast where buyers eagerly wait.
Quando il pescatore ha il pesce nella rete, ci chiama la notte, dice ho pescato e ce lo porta.
In Giulio's hands, they'll become even more valuable. He will extract all the oil from the fish and make a sauce that is worth $160 per litre, which is 4 times more expensive than other popular fish sauces. But the process will take 3 years. Giulio needs to collect the sauce, drop by drop. So how do all these little fish get turned into sauce? And what makes it so expensive? Local fishermen head out to sea between April and November.
Quindi usciamo giornalmente, usciamo la sera e rientriamo la mattina.
After attracting the anchovies with lights, Captain Gilles and his crew use purse seine nets to catch them. The tightly woven nets are designed to trap the anchovies without entangling them.
Usiamo questi coppi grandi, un coppo grande per poter prendere il pescato, perché non lo puoi prendere ammassato perché si schiaccerebbe, si rovina la qualità del pescato, si rovina la carne. Quindi ne prendiamo un po' alla volta dalla rete in mare e lo mettiamo in questi contenitori in plastica con acqua a 0 gradi e molto ghiaccio per fargli prendere ghiaccio e fare un'ottima conservazione e catena del freddo.
Because of how large the nets are, fishermen need to be highly experienced to use them effectively. To maintain the anchovies' quality and price tag, it's crucial that they don't get crushed or damaged in any way.
Facciamo questo mestiere tramandato da generazione. Ogni famiglia a Cetara, perché ci sono più famiglie a Cetara che fanno questa tipologia di pesca, poi dopo ha i propri segreti che tramanda da padre in figlio.
The bigger the anchovy, the more oil it will release, which helps result in the most flavorful sauce. To catch the biggest fish possible, Captain Gilles combines what he's learned from his father with new technology. Echo sounders not only help locate anchovies, but confirm their exact size and weight.
È un pesce da 9 cm, 9 cm e mezzo, vedi? 8 e 3, quindi una taglia decente come pesca delle alici. Perché le alici più sono grandi e più hanno prezzo. Le alici più piccole hanno un prezzo che possono girare dai 10-15 euro intorno a una cassa.
Larger anchovies sell for between 25 and 30 euros per crate at Italian fish markets.
Con la colatura si arriva a 100 euro grazie al sacrificio che facciamo dei ragazzi che stanno a bordo.
When it comes to making high-quality colatura di alici, the Italian name for anchovy sauce, the freshness of the anchovy makes all the difference.
Tu senti il sapore del mare, il sapore del pesce, però non ce l'ha in bocca il pesce.
Giulio's family has been making colatura di alici since 1915. This is what most of his mornings look like during anchovy season. Giulio has just received this morning's catch.
Allora, vedete, prima cosa, il pesce di stamattina. Questa è la prima fase, cioè si chiama scapezzatura. Togliamo la testa e l'interiore in un solo colpo. Guardate, testa e interiore in un solo colpo. Da ragazzi noi facevamo la gara a chi faceva più veloce.
Once the anchovies have been cleaned, they're placed inside barrels full of salt.
Lo fa disidratare.
Giulio uses high-quality Italian salt from Sicily.
Perché il nonno usava il sale di Trapani e quindi usiamo anche noi il sale di Trapani.
After 24 hours in the salt, the anchovies are ready to be preserved and pressed.
Questa è la fase più importante, la salatura. E bisogna, come diceva mio nonno, bisogna farli in silenzio. È così, ad uno, il pesce messo a pancia e schiena. Verrà messo così, pancia e schiena. Perché quando noi poi andremo a pressare, non c'è vuoto nel pesce.
The anchovies are placed inside terzini, small barrels made from chestnut wood.
Se uno lavora in altre cose, secondo me non esce la colatura. Esce un'altra cosa, esce un sapore particolare, diverso.
When the wood comes into contact with salt, it hardens, fully sealing the anchovies inside. Each barrel fits about 50 to 60 anchovies, depending on the size of the fish. The salt kickstarts the release of liquids inside the anchovies. It takes 3 years and about 50 to 60 pounds of fresh anchovies to produce just a litre of anchovy sauce. Making colatura di alici is a meticulous and time-consuming process, but one he thoroughly enjoys.
Diciamo che è quasi finito. Nonno diceva, perché non lo facciamo bello? Perché non lo facciamo diventare un principino? Ci facciamo una bella corona. E faceva questo. Adesso vi faccio vedere. Guarda, sale. E poi ci faceva la corona. Ecco qua. Adesso è finito.
What really brings the salt, anchovies and the barrel together is weighing everything down with a heavy stone.
Queste sono pietre che vedete un po' più lisce, prese a mare, che le prendeva mio nonno, mio padre, che usiamo ancora noi. Immaginate che questo liquido comincia a trapassare questi stadi di alici mature, si insaporisce ancora di più e vedremo che a goccia a goccia cola.
To check if the sauce is ready, Giulio will drill directly into the barrels.
Ci vorrà un po' di tempo perché potete ben capire che il terzigno è 3 centimetri di spessore, quindi per entrare dentro questo affarino di 2 millimetri è un po' difficile.
The colatura di alici drips out of the barrel slowly. This is when Giulio can confirm the quality of the color and aroma.
La colatura deve essere un ambrato scuro, molto scuro. Non senti il sapore, cioè l'odore del sale, ma senti il sapore dell'odore del pesce salato. Quella è la colatura.
There is no way Giulio can speed up the process if he doesn't want to ruin the sauce. It must come out at its own pace, drop by drop. This makes authentic colatura di alici a true investment, and the intensive labour involved in producing such small amounts every year has meant a higher price tag.
Mio padre e mio nonno vendevano a pochissimo. Quest'anno abbiamo venduto a 150 euro al litro.
The first batch of anchovies caught in early spring is transformed into colatura di alici by December, so the sauce has become a traditional part of celebrating winter holidays.
Per me colatura è sangue, è casa. Questo è il prodotto che si usava e si usa alla vigilia dell'Immacolato, e in ogni casa c'era questa tradizione di fare lo spaghetto con la colatura. La colatura d'alici al palato è flipper, perché la colatura tradizionale parte dal dolce al salato, c'è l'amaro, è un sapore completo secondo me.
Why are Americans supplying 2/3 of the world's blood plasma? They need the cash. In 2019 alone, plasma companies paid about $2.7 billion for Americans' donations.
I feel like I'm helping somebody and they're helping me out.
I'm glad that it does help people, but I only found out about it because it pays you money, and I only find myself doing it when I need money.
While donors make about $50 per donation, a liter of plasma is worth over $200 on the open market. So why is plasma so expensive? When Liz Savage and her husband first started donating plasma in college, the earnings doubled their monthly income.
You know, $400 goes a long way when you're a broke student.
Now she uses the money to help out with expenses, like buying her kids new school clothes. She visits the center near Baltimore, Maryland, twice a week.
I've tried DoorDash, I've tried, little things here and there, but this is consistent. There is a need for it.
Plasma makes up more than half of blood volume. Hospitals use it in transfusions to treat burns, liver failure, and more recently, COVID-19. But plasma is also used to create drugs that are some of the most expensive a patient can buy. To make medicine, companies break down plasma into its protein components, such as antibodies. But plasma is over 90% water, so removing enough proteins to treat just one patient for a year takes between 130 and 1,300 donations. That's led to a boom in private donation centers, where donors are paid an average of $35 to $65 a visit. That means if you donate the maximum of 104 times a year, you can earn more than $6,000. Donating plasma takes 9 times longer than a typical blood donation, but it brings in 3 times more plasma than just removing plasma from a blood donation. And because the human body replenishes plasma within 48 hours, Americans are allowed to give up to twice a week. That's compared to 8 weeks between each blood donation. Regular donors can make extra cash through referral bonuses, holiday giveaways, and rewards programs.
This is the
gold, silver, platinum. Past 35 days for a donation, you can redeem the points. Keep you coming back. That's marketing right there.
On social media, I've already been getting ads saying, be a founding member of the center. You can get $700 a month.
Annalidi Sochoa lives near a new plasma center in Ypsilanti, Michigan. She's a social science researcher who's tracking the rise in for-profit plasma centers.
Since the Great Recession, the amount of plasma donations has roughly tripled to 2019 levels.
There are over 900 private plasma centers across the U.S., mostly owned by 3 companies that control 2/3 of the global plasma industry.
We compensate donors for their time and their commitment to the program. Their money is placed on a debit card, they can get gas, they can go grocery shopping, so it's very convenient.
Researchers like Ochoa say these centers are often concentrated in states with lower minimum wages and cities with more people living under the poverty line.
These areas are being targeted because these are the areas where people who are most in need of income live.
One study of plasma donors in Cleveland found that more than half were unemployed. 57% said at least a third of their income that month was coming from donating plasma.
I'm the only one working, so with 2 kids, you gotta make up the money somehow.
Regular donors told Insider they spend their money on gas, rent, phone bills, food, and student loans. In the 90 minutes it takes to donate, they can make 5 times the federal minimum wage.
I kind of figured into my budget now.
The need for it is only growing. Each year, global demand for plasma-based drugs is rising 6 to 8%. Analysts say the market for them could near $50 billion by 2027. That's double what the world spends on bath soap each year. Running a plasma center isn't cheap. A single plasma extraction machine costs an average of $50,000, so equipment alone can cost $4 million per center. Plasma companies spend over half of their operating expenses on just the collection and manufacturing of the plasma itself. That huge investment drives up the cost of the drugs.
It's about $4,000 to $5,000 out of pocket. And there have been times where I have had to, I've taken out loans.
Christina Brown was diagnosed with primary immunodeficiency as a college student. She says that year she was in and out of the hospital with 15 urinary tract infections, 5 bouts of bronchitis, and 2 cases of pneumonia. Now every week, Christina self-administers 100 milliliters of a plasma-derived drug into the layer of tissue on her abdomen. That's a lot of liquid. A patient with diabetes usually injects less than 1 milliliter of insulin at a time.
I'm able to have a life and to be alive.
These drugs are therapies, not cures. So people like Christina rely on them for the rest of their lives, and they can cost over $200,000 a year. The pandemic could make these already high prices rise even further. Global plasma collections were down 15% in 2020 because of social distancing, cleaning requirements, and fewer donors visiting centers.
I'm kind of starting to stock up on doses now. I'm getting refills the day that I can get a refill.
And patients will feel the impacts of that in the next 7 to 12 months, the time it takes for plasma to go from a donor to the drugstore shelf.
It's pretty terrifying.
This is all while plasma is in high demand as antibody transfusions show promising results in treating COVID-19. And private companies are collecting plasma from COVID patients to develop drugs.
There is no country in the world that is self-sufficient in plasma for plasma therapies unless it pays donors.
Compensating donors has proven to increase supply. In the Czech Republic, paid donations were legalized in 2008, and donations increased 7-fold in 3 years. In Europe, the countries that bring in the most plasma per capita are the ones that pay. Even in places like Italy, where donors get a paid day off work, supply doesn't meet demand. Whereas Germany, which allows paid donation, collects even more plasma than it needs. America has more lenient policies than other countries, including those that pay for plasma. The only other place that lets donors give as frequently is Canada, where paid donations are only legal in certain provinces. That's why the US system is so large, efficient, and lucrative, and why some countries decide it's just cheaper to import plasma from America. But there isn't much research on the health effects of donating plasma 104 times a year, the US legal limit.
Your veins start to hurt after so long, you gotta switch arms back and forth.
The more often people donate plasma, the lower their protein levels are. So frequent visits mean each donation brings in less and less of the components needed to make drugs.
Our concern is that people who are vulnerable are giving their plasma to make ends meet, and we don't actually know what the long-term repercussions of this is.
Argan oil is predominantly used in high-end cosmetic products and Moroccan cuisine. The oil comes from the seed of the argan tree, native only to the narrow strip of semi-desert between Morocco's Atlantic coast and the Atlas Mountains. The Amazigh people of North Africa have been using the argan seeds for centuries, and the methods for creating this costly oil haven't changed in years.
الحالة الأولى ديال الإنتاج منين يعني كان دابا حنا كنجمعوا أفياش كنجمعوا هاد الحبة ديال الأرغان كنجمعوه ملي تيكمل النضج ديالو يعني في الأول كيكون على هاد اللون هذا كيكون خضر ما يمكنش لينا أننا نجو مثلا نضربوه بالعصا ولا نجنيوه في الشجرة كنخليوه حتى كيطيح في الأرض وكيرجع في واحد اللون اللي هو بني.
Once collected, the argan fruits are sun-dried before being peeled and depulped by hand to remove the fleshy outer layers. The leftover argan nut then needs to be cracked to retrieve the oil-rich kernel inside.
وهذه كتبقى هي المرحلة الصعيبة ماشي سهلة ماشي أي واحد يجي ويهرس هاد الحبة هذه لأن خص تكون عندك واحد التقنية في الطريقة ديال التهريس ديالها باش تحاول تحافظ على هاد اللوزة ما خصهاش تهرس لينا باش يعني نحصلوا على 1 لتر ديال الأرغان تقريبا كناخذوا واحد 40 كيلو من هاد الحب هذا باش اللي كيعطينا تقريبا واحد 20 كيلو من هاد النواة.
The next stage is grinding, which is often also done by hand.
يعني كنطحنوا اللوزات ديال الأرغان بهاد الطريقة التقليدية اللي لقينا جدادنا ومعروفة في التراث المغربي ديالنا. هاد الطريقة هذه كتاخذ منا واحد الوقت يعني باش نحصلوا على 1 لتر دي كيخصك تقريبا 2 ساعات ولهذا فالتطورات وكنقدروا يمكن الا كانت عندنا شي طلبية كثيرة كنستعملوا الآلة يعني واحد الوقت قليل يعني في 5 دقائق تقدر توجد تعطيك 1 لتر ولا 2 لتر. بالنسبه لزيت ارغان هو يعني ماشي بحال الزيوت الاخرى كيبقى واحد الزيت اللي غاليه كيف ما كيسميوها الذهب الاحمر يعني زيت غاليه بزاف وكتطلب في الانتاج ديالها واحد المجهود كبير. يعني بالنسبه لواحد المراه الا غتوجد لك 1 لتر ديال زيت ارغان كيطلب منها تقريبا واحد 24 ساعه.
The leftover pulp removed from the fruit is sold as animal feed, particularly for goats, who are intrinsically linked to the argan tree. In some areas, it's tradition to allow goats to climb the trees to freely feed on the fruits. Argan kernels are then collected from their excrement, saving the laborious work of cracking open the nuts manually. But nowadays, in most argan forestries, this peculiar site is merely used as a tourist attraction.
هذيك الزيت يعني ملي دارت عليها التحاليل تلقاو بانها غير صالحه للاكل. اذا الماعز عنده يعني كيكون واحد المضره بالنسبه لهذاك. والماعز هو جزء من المنطقه والسياح يعني تعجبهم بزاف انهم يجيو يشوفوا المعزه فوق الشجره ديال الارغان.
Traditionally, Amazigh women, who until 1956 required the man's permission to leave their homes, made argan oil primarily for culinary purposes, using methods passed down through generations. This artisanal oil was occasionally sold on the roadside in recycled bottles for as little as $3 per litre.
Et donc, on s'est aperçu en fait que les femmes qui préparaient cette huile d'une façon artisanale, elles avaient une peau vraiment très douce et pas de rides du tout. Mais on n'avait aucune preuve scientifique.
Zubida Sharouf first studied the argan tree for her PhD in the late 1980s, when the species was in dangerous decline. After conducting scientific research to support the moisturising benefits of argan oil on hair and skin, Sharuf planned to transform the environmental problem into an economic solution.
L'objectif n'était pas de garder ces résultats sur les tiroirs à l'université, mais sortir sur le terrain, organiser la filière, ces femmes qui n'étaient pas organisées du tout, qui produisaient de l'huile d'argan de façon traditionnelle chez elles. Et donc, c'était très difficile, c'était quelque chose de nouveau. Elles ne savaient pas ce que c'est qu'une coopérative. Ensuite, ils ne sont jamais sortis de chez elles. Et donc, quand même, on a commencé par ces 16 femmes. Et dès que les autres ont vu ce que ça a donné pour cette première coopérative, donc il y a eu beaucoup de femmes qui sont venues nous voir, qui voulaient aussi s'organiser en coopérative et profiter de la commercialisation de l'huile d'argan.
Sure enough, the rapid rise in popularity of argan oil not only brought profit to the region, but also revitalised an entire ecosystem. The newfound respect for the value of argan trees ensured stability for the species, and in turn, the surrounding wildlife and community reaped the benefits. The argan tree, known locally as the Tree of Life, provides food, shelter, and protection from desertification, and its deep roots prevent soil erosion, allowing vegetated grass to grow for grazing livestock. It's estimated that up to 90% of the economy in this region is owed to the argan tree.
Il y a pratiquement 3 millions de personnes qui subsistent de l'arganerie parce qu'il fournit beaucoup de journées de travail pour les populations locales. Rien que la seule extraction de l'huile, elle fournit pratiquement 1 million de journées de travail. Mais le rôle le plus important, c'est le rôle environnemental. L'arganier est vraiment le dernier rideau vert au niveau du désert.
In just one generation, the international market for argan oil has risen from just 200 litres to 4,000 metric tonnes in 2019. By 2025, the state's ambition is to sell over 10,000 metric tonnes. To facilitate this increase, the area for producing the oil has expanded more than 100 miles south of Aswara and is due to expand north. As with any costly ingredient, argan oil products are often adulterated. Both cosmetic and culinary argan oil is often labelled as pure, despite the undisclosed percentage of Argania kernel oil being mixed with a host of chemical compounds. And cheaper, mechanically extracted oil has begun to appear on the market, for as little as $22 a litre, threatening the stability of the local cooperatives. However, some cosmetic giants such as L'Oreal have committed to fair trade programmes to help ensure the stability of their argan oil and the preservation of the forest's biodiversity. With the help of the cooperatives, the traditional skills held by the Amazigh women have created a booming industry. But even though this income has granted some financial independence in a male-dominated society, the women normally make less than $220 a month, below Morocco's recommended national minimum wage. With the argan oil industry predicted to continue its growth, the prosperity of the Amazigh women remains to be seen.
The rarest honey in the world is only found at high altitudes. Like this remote cliff in the Himalayas of Nepal. Honey hunters hang by a rope ladder to harvest these combs. One wrong move and the plunge is 800 feet. What's extracted is called mad honey because it can make you hallucinate. For centuries, an indigenous people, the Gurungs, have been the only ones to harvest it. It's a big part of their culture, and they believe it has healing properties too. But now the rest of the world has caught on. A 32-ounce bottle goes for $300 in the US. We followed Man Bahadur Gurung on the 3-day-long honey hunting ritual to find out why this ancient tradition is still happening and what makes it such a risky business. The village of Sildunga sits about 6,000 feet above sea level. 64 families live here, and they're all involved in the hunt for honey. Everyone comes together the day before for the Maruni dance, which celebrates good over evil. The next day, Man, the village's main honey hunter, gets the handmade bamboo ladder ready. They keep essentials to the minimum: ropes, buckets, and gear to protect against bee stings. They're heading to Tarebhir, a cliff where they've hunted for thousands of years. It's a 3-hour drive. The village elder leads the commencement ritual. At the bottom of the cliff, they start a fire to smoke out the bees. At the top, another group assembles the ladder. Then they tie it to a tree and slowly move it down the cliff. Man climbs down the ladder barefoot for the best grip. He's about 80 stories above ground. But for safety, Man ties himself to the ladder by a rope. That's his only harness. As the bees swarm around him, he puts his hands in his pocket to protect them from stings. He still remembers the time when he was attacked by bees 3 years ago. The stings are painful, and to avoid fainting, Man rubs honey into his hands. But he's trading one risk for another, because the honey makes his hands slippery. Still, it has been 30 years since a honey hunter died on the job. Man uses his 12-foot-long stick called a tango to cut the honeycomb. Finally, he breaks off the comb. 800 feet below, a plastic sheet catches it. They collected 8 combs, leaving behind 36 others. The next day, hunters head back to the village and start extracting the honey. Man says it's more abundant, stronger, and sweeter in the spring. The smaller combs usually have the most, about 500 ounces. locals celebrate the hunter's safe return in a tradition called shosho. It's meant to settle any nerves the men had during the hunt.
समाजको लागि अब गर्छु भनेर आगो निस्किएपछि त हैन त्यो त गर्नै पर्यो जसरी भए नि जसरी गर्नै पर्यो डर त हुनै भयो नि.
These customs have been passed down for generations in Nepal, where people have been using this honey as a natural medicine since 1300 BC. They believe that it cures respiratory issues and that it works as an antiseptic and an aphrodisiac.
त्यो काठमाडौँतिर हुन्छ नि खाएर बसिरहेको ब्लास्ट परेको त्यो उठ्नै नसक्ने त्यस्तो औषधि हुन्छ भन्छन् सर.
While scientists are still researching the effects of mad honey, global demand has exploded in recent years. And that has led to overharvesting, with foreign groups coming in to hunt for their own honey in the Gurung's land.
हाम्रो बेसीको चीज अर्कोले कसरी निकाल्यो भनेर हामीले खोज तलासी गर्दै अन्तिममा मुद्दा सुद्धा गरेर बोल्छ.
So the Gurungs found a solution to regain control. And there's a reason why it's home to the very uncommon mad honey. The largest honeybee species in the world, measuring up to 1.2 inches, lives here. The Apis laboriosa nest in altitudes ranging from 3,000 to 10,000 feet above sea level. And they feed on a specific type of rhododendron that has a neurotoxin in its nectar. That's what triggers hallucinations. But climate change is causing the flowers to bloom unpredictably. The bee population is also shrinking because of natural disasters like wildfires, heavier rainfall, and extreme temperature changes. This all means less honey. In 2022, the village harvested about 4 gallons of honey, compared to about 40 gallons in 2017. Half of the honey is distributed evenly to every single villager. The rest goes to markets in Nepal. Other cliffs across the Himalayas and Turkey also have mad honey. And it sells online for hundreds of dollars. But this village makes only $1,800 on average every year from honey sales.
त्यो चाहिँ कुरा चाहिँ त्यो बेलामा चाहिँ हुन्छ.
So it's not really about the money. Most people here rely on farming for a steady income, like Man's father. But he participates in all of the hunting traditions like every villager. Man began hunting in his early 40s, when the Gurungs believe a man is in the prime of his life. Before that, he worked construction jobs in Malaysia. In fact, 56% of Nepali families have at least one person working and living abroad because of the lack of jobs in the country. They send home more than $8 billion a year in remittances. Man's son is also a construction worker.
लेभल 1 मा चाहिँ काम गर्नको लागि चाहिँ कामको सिलसिलामा चाहिँ कतारमा गएको छ.
But Man hopes he will come home soon to carry on the tradition of honey hunting.
तल भिरमा जानी अब मै भनम न पहिले चाहिँ मै गयो नि त हैन तर म मात्रै सिकेर पनि भएन मेरो भाइ मेरो छोरा हैन उनीहरुले पनि सिक्नु पर्यो भन्ने हिजो भयो नि त म चाहिँ गइन हिजो.
Just 1 kilogram of jasmine oil can cost over $5,000. It's a key ingredient in luxury perfumes. But to get 1 kilogram of some jasmine oil, these women need to pluck over 5,000 buds. So what does jasmine smell like? And why is the oil so expensive? For hundreds of years, jasmine has been used in India to make garlands and headpieces for special occasions. Its scent is sweet, fruity, and floral, blending well with other fragrances. And while India grows over 80 varieties of jasmine, Jasmine grandiflorum and sambak are 2 of the most commercially valuable.
it's been considered very divine. And sambac, especially even amongst other flowers, is considered one notch superior. It's the most preferred flower.
Jasmine sambac has this ease, this friendliness, this happiness. It is a joyful scent.
Jasmine sambac thrives in Madurai, the jasmine capital of India. Like any flower, jasmine produces a strong scent only after it blooms. But local sellers don't want jasmine flowers, they want the buds. That's because once the flower blooms, the scent only lasts a few days. The buds last longer, so they're easier to transport, whether it be for garlands or oil extraction. Raja runs a jasmine oil company, but before Raja can produce the oil, he'll need to wait for the day's harvest. Jasmine is a night-blooming flower. To maximize the harvest and ensure the buds make it to the markets in time, harvesters head to the fields early. Rati is one of a handful of women tasked with plucking the buds. It's not as simple as grabbing each bud she sees.
Only the right bud blooms that day. Otherwise, it's not going to bloom. So if it doesn't bloom, no fragrance.
Deciphering which buds to harvest requires a keen eye, one that Rati has trained over the last 10 years in these fields.
இந்த பூவு இன்னைக்கு பறிக்கிற பூவு இந்த பூவு இன்னைக்கு எடுக்க மாட்டோம் அது 2 நாள் கழிச்சு எடுப்போம் இது 2 நாள் கழிச்சு இதை எடுப்போம் இது பூத்த பூவு நேத்து பூத்த பூவு இதை எடுக்க மாட்டோம் இந்த பூவு நாங்கள் பூத்த பூவு எடுக்கவே மாட்டோம்.
Rati goes to each bush one by one, plucking thousands of buds before she collects a kilogram of jasmine. Gathering that much takes her about an hour. The work must be done gently by hand, so as not to damage the buds. Damaged or wilted buds mean more work for Rati.
Jasmine is a very laborious picking process. As a kilo of jasmine, just to give you a perspective, will have about 5,000 to 6,000 independent flowers. So to pick 1 kilo, they have to move 5,000 times. The hand moves back and forth 5,000 times to pick just 1 kilo of flowers.
But that's still a tiny fraction of the buds needed to produce a kilogram of oil. For 1 kilogram of jasmine oil, Raja needs 1 metric ton, or 1,000 kilograms of flowers. As she works, Rati collects the buds in her sari to protect them and preserve their fragrance.
சவுக்கரை பேத்தில் கொட்டினா பூ வெந்துடும் மார்க்கெட்டு போகக்குள்ளேயும் பூ வெந்துடும் எடுக்க மாட்டாங்க மார்க்கெட்டில் கட்ட முடியாது வண்ண முடியாது பூ வெயிலுக்கு வெந்துடும் சாக்கையில் போட்டு அனுப்புனா அது பூ வெந்துடும் அது வசதி நாங்கள் சாரில் கட்டி.
She'll harvest for about 5 hours straight. It's tedious and tiring, but it's critical for her to keep moving before it gets too hot. Then the buds head to the local market.
இங்கே வந்து நிலக்கோட்டையில் மல்லி தரம்பாக்கம் வந்திருக்கோம் குவாலிட்டி பார்த்து எடுத்து கம்பெனிக்கு அனுப்பிச்சிட்டு போயிட்டே இருக்கோம்.
Murugan is used to the market's chaotic energy. He's been sourcing jasmine for oil production for 18 years. Practically all corners of the market are full of buyers, bags of jasmine buds, and scales to determine the proper quantity for sale. The rate today is 500 rupees per kilogram. Before buying, he assesses the buds closely to determine if the size will be worth the price.
இது சைஸ் ஸ்மால் சைஸு பொடிசு இதில் ஓப்பன் ஆனால் வாசனை இருக்காது ஸ்மால் கம்மியாக இருக்கும் இது ஃபேக்ட்ரிக்கு சென்ட்டுக்கு போட மாட்டோம் இது நல்லா இருக்கும் பெஸ்ட் குவாலிட்டி இதை போடுவோம் இது நல்லா ஸ்மெல் இருக்கும் நல்லா ஓப்பன் ஆகும் நல்லாவும் இருக்கும்.
When the sun has set, Raja's employees begin unloading bags full of jasmine buds back at the factory. The first step is to spread them out with rakes, and then again with their hands and feet. Spreading out the buds is crucial to preserving them. Leaving them in a big pile would generate heat, which would again cause them to wilt. Then Raja's team waits until the flowers begin to bloom.
The minute it starts blooming, it starts emitting the fragrance. And then after some time, you can see emits a bad fragrance. So, there's a constant chemical reaction that's happening in the flower. For us, it's so important to capture the fragrance at the right moment, which is soon after it blooms, which is the best in terms of yield and the span.
Like several other white flowers, jasmine is rich in indole. Ironically, indole is found in feces too. In the case of feces, there's too much indole, so it produces an unpleasant smell. But in limited amounts, it creates an appealing aroma, as it does with jasmine. When the jasmine has bloomed, Raja's team loads the flowers into 4 5,000-liter extractors. The flowers then soak in a solvent. Once the solvent absorbs the smell of the flowers, they remove all of the liquid. They're left with this waxy, hard substance called concrete. It's what Raja uses to finally extract the oil.
You add alcohol into the concretes, and then the concrete is separated off the waxes, it's filtered, and then we get the absolute.
Jasmine Sambac is the most coveted of all jasmine flowers, hence the high price. At its peak, jasmine Sambac flowers can cost 10 times more than other types of jasmine. And when it comes to the final price of the oil, the majority of it depends on the cost of the flower itself.
About 60%, the bulk of the cost, is attributed towards the flower cost itself. So it varies depending on the price of the flowers every year. The cost of 1 kilo of concrete is around $2,750 to $3,000. And the absolute is almost the double, like 5,500 plus per kilo of absolute.
But jasmine Sambac oil wasn't always this valuable. In fact, Raja says it was rarely harvested before the launch of Dior's J'adore fragrance.
That was when the Sambac became the in thing. Before that, Sambac was grown in India, but it was not really extracted.
Today, jasmine oil extracts travel from India all the way to Paris, where they will be used in many high-end fragrances, particularly at Guerlain. Guerlain sources jasmine Sambac oil directly from Raja.
The signature of the house is made with jasmine and 5 other ingredients. So jasmine is almost everywhere.
The company produces all of its fragrance blends in-house, including Mont Guerlain.
Jasmine Sambac is the star of Mont Guerlain. You have the top note of lavender, blend then in the jasmine Sambac florals you enjoy. Then comes the sandalwood and the vanilla. This is such a soft and beautiful fragrance.
Oil paint has been used for hundreds of years. It's made from a drying oil like flaxseed and pigment, sometimes with fillers and thickeners added. When mixed and crushed, these ingredients bind and thicken to form a permanent paint. While the rise of oil paint is associated with the Renaissance, paintings using poppy seed oil have been dated as far back as 7th century Afghanistan. But there's one key reason this paint hasn't ever been cheap. Pigments cost a lot of money.
So in a good oil paint, you're going to be looking for high pigment loading and a good quality pigment in that high pigment loading. So it doesn't matter if you have loads of pigment if it's a bad quality pigment. You're looking for light fastness so it doesn't fade, and tests on light fastness that have been going on for generations, in fact, for some pigments. So you're not going to create a masterpiece and then 50 years down the line, it's completely washed out.
The highest quality oil paint can be up to 75% pigment. And throughout history, the most sought after pigments have been worth far more than their weight in gold. And that's because they take a lot of work to discover and to make. The favourite imperial colour in Roman times, Tyrian purple, was a bright pigment made from the glands of sea snails, and it could take 12,000 snails to make just 2 grams of the colour. Indian yellow was originally made from the urine of cows fed only on mango leaves, and in the 16th to 19th centuries, mummy brown was actually made with the ground up remains of Egyptian mummies. And while the colour was perfect for some flesh tones, we quickly ran out of mummies to use.
Pigments do dramatically change the cost, and in professional levels you'll have series. So you'll have probably series 1, well up to series 7. The higher the number, the more expensive it is. And that's due to the pigments, how difficult they are to obtain, where they come from, and also how in demand they are as a product in the real world.
Possibly the most valuable, though, was ultramarine, literally meaning beyond the sea, as it had to be mined in Afghanistan. It was made from lapis lazuli, which in its purest pigment form can still cost up to $30,000 per kilo. The gemstone was used to make the pigment until a synthetic version was created in 1826. And the vibrant blue was valued so highly in the Renaissance that it was generally reserved for painting the robes of the Virgin Mary. Synthetic versions of many of these pigments have now been created. And while this means many are cheaper, some can still be difficult to produce. Cobalt blue, for example, has to be made by heating its components to 1,200 degrees Celsius. And once you have these pigments, they're tricky to work with. Winsor & Newton has been making oil paints for almost 200 years, and its factory in France produces over 5 million litres of paint each year.
In fact, produce paint is like cooking. So we have mixing, so we are mixing components like pigments and other additives like oil. We have then milling, so it depends, we're using different type of machines. So we're using granite, ceramic or steel. Then we are testing, okay, so testing the viscosity, the grain and of course the color.
The whole process is so select, so for every single pigment you need to handle it in a particular way. So it will need a particular amount of oil with it, and that ratio changes for every pigment. And you're going to need to grind it to a particular fineness. And actually, even with the same pigment, the milling and the grinding will affect the colour you have. So if you overgrind, you might end up with something duller, or with another colour, if you grind it very fine, you might end up with a purple rather than a blue.
The research and testing for these colours can take months or even years to get right. Small samples of each colour are made in a lab to measure consistency and light fastness. Above all else, the quality of oil paint needs to be reliable, as professional artists need to guarantee that what they're working on now will last for hundreds of years. And despite comparatively new paints like acrylic, oil still remains an artist favourite.
We've still got works that are still beautiful and relevant from the 15th century. And it's durable, and it has this ability to layer, where you can scrape back, you can keep working, you can work on a piece for years and keep on redoing it, and it gives every piece this history. And you know, the materials themselves are expensive, they're reliable, they're gorgeous. I mean, they come out of the painting at you.
Champagne is often used as a generic term for sparkling wine. But in fact, champagne is only true champagne if it's made here, in Champagne. About 150 kilometers east of Paris, this highly protected region of France is home to the world's most prestigious and expensive champagne cellars and cellars, such as Moet and Chandon and Perrier-Jouet. All other sparkling wines made outside of this region, even those from neighbouring parts of France, must be labelled differently. Which means, in this relatively small area, a little over twice the size of San Francisco, the world's entire stock of true champagne is made. That's over 300 million bottles every year, with an annual revenue of over $5 billion. Champagne sales have grown steadily since the 1950s, but its future growth depends on the protection of the region's unique climate. Northern France's variable conditions are the first factor for elevated prices. With an average temperature of 50 degrees Fahrenheit, this location is cooler than France's other wine-growing regions, which gives the grapes the right acidity for sparkling wine production. However, an often freezing continental weather front makes the winemaking process more difficult than other dependable ecosystems.
La particularité du Champagne, c'est d'abord sa situation géographique et les conditions climatiques. Et ensuite, évidemment, c'est un processus d'élaboration qui a été peaufiné, qui a été amélioré au fil du temps, au fil des siècles maintenant, puisqu'on parle de plus de 2 siècles. On cueille des raisins, évidemment, à parfaite maturité. Ça, c'est déjà un critère très, très important. Et ensuite, eh bien, le processus de fermentation alcoolique va nous donner un vin blanc, ou plusieurs, ou une variété de vins blancs.
During harvest, 120,000 workers descend on Champagne to pick grapes from 84,000 acres of vines.
It's harvested by hand because the machine it's forbidden by law, and it's important to select only the best grapes, especially because of the heterogeneity of each different plots and each different vines. For me, it's a really good sign, an important sign of quality. To be on the hill, it's a really good thing for the exposition. The sun is always going on the vines all the day. When it's raining, the water never stops. It's going on the bottom. This is where, historically, we have the best structure of the soil. Champagne, it's clay and chalk. This is really the best quality in terms of soil.
Authentic Champagne is produced via the méthode champenoise, where the wine undergoes a primary fermentation in oak or stainless steel vats and a secondary fermentation inside the bottle. This method is controlled and restricted within the European Union, so that wines from outside the Champagne region cannot be described as champagne. However, wines from all over the world are produced in exactly the same way, and instead are labelled as sparkling wine, produced via the méthode traditionnelle. Some winemakers in countries outside of the EU ignore European labelling laws altogether and continue to produce sparkling wine bearing the Champagne name. These imitations are constantly challenged by the Comité Champagne, which works with more than 80 lawyers worldwide to protect the authentic Champagne brand. Ultimately, despite similarities in production and possibly taste, only true Champagne comes with the history and prestige of the region. Champagne production dates back to the 3rd century, when the Romans first planted vineyards in northeastern France. During the mid-17th century, with the development of bottled fermentation, Champagne officially became a sacred drink, when it was served at the king's courts during the accession of Louis XIV. However, the carbon dioxide gas, which built up inside these early bottles, often caused them to explode in the cellars. Therefore, great efforts went into ridding the wine of its bubbles. But by the 19th century, the sparkling version of Champagne had grown in popularity, especially among the rich and royalty. As the large champagne houses optimized mass production of sparkling champagne, with the development of thicker glass and corks, the modern champagne industry began to form. Amazingly, despite the region becoming a key battlefield during both World War I and World War II, some champagne production still continued. It's estimated that by the end of the Great War, about 40% of Champagne's vineyards had been destroyed. Because of the cutback in production, bottles made during either war fetch a high price. In 2015, Sotheby's auctioned a Krug cellar visit and a tasting of their wartime 1915 vintage for $116,000. Champagne's affiliation with luxury, wealth, and celebrity has kept prices high, from crowning kings to launching great ships. Even Jay-Z has gotten in on the action. In 2014, he became part owner of Armand de Brignac, also known as Ace of Spades, a champagne brand run by the Cartier family. In September 2019, they released their rarest, priciest cuvée yet, comprised of 3 vintages from 2009, 2010, and 2012. The wine was left to age for 6 years until the bottles, only 3,535 of them, were made available for a cool $1,000 per bottle. But what about the future? Champagne became the world's first wine-growing region to examine its carbon footprint and implement a carbon plan, as a result of worrying statistics. Global warming has seen temperatures in the region rise by 1.2 degrees Celsius over the last 30 years, and the grape harvest dates have moved forward by a fortnight. As Champagne's perfect climatic conditions are changing, and the Paris Accord climate targets fail to keep up with global warming, the future of winemaking in this historic region could be in jeopardy. Manuka honey is known for being earthier, richer, and more viscous than many other honeys. It comes from the nectar of the flower Leptospermum sciparium, also known as Manuka, which is only native to New Zealand. And Manuka, in fact, is a Maori word.
The fact that it comes from New Zealand, that gives it a premium just to start with. And because the bee travels up to about 6 kilometres to collect this honey. And so this honey is representative of the environment, and that environment is of New Zealand, Aotearoa. The plant itself and the honey is very, very rare. Out of all the honeys in the world, it probably represents 1% of all the world honeys. It's difficult to harvest. It's only a 2 to 6 week harvesting period, and the flower is only open for 12 days. And in New Zealand we have wind and we have rain and all the rest of it. So there's a lot of luck involved in getting the bee, or a lot of effort from the beekeeper. And for some years there is no honey production for some beekeepers. And we have to go to the big extent also of using helicopters to collect this honey.
Although Manuka bushes can also be found in Australia, New Zealand accounts for almost all of the world's production, with exports worth $204 million and expected to quadruple to $800 million by 2028. New Zealand's honey is protected by a quality standard that safeguards Manuka's special properties.
This honey is inexpensive honey, and anything that is expensive, people will try and copy. People will try and mimic, or people will try and cheat. So a lot of the cost here isn't actually in the protection of it, or the research, so we know it's unique, we know it's from New Zealand. We can identify it. We've put labs around the world to be able to do this identification. The New Zealand government has set up a standard to say what is Manuka honey.
So, how does the grading system work, and what exactly are you looking for in Manuka honey? We spoke to Dr. Adrian Charlton from Fairer Science, a lab in the north of England where Manuka honey is tested to identify its unique compounds.
As standard, we will test for 3 compounds. Dihydroxyacetone, which is known as DHA, methyl glyoxal, known as MgO, and hydroxymethylfurfural, HMF. These are the basic tests that we would undertake to make sure that Manuka honey contains the antimicrobial characteristics that the consumer would expect. We can detect them, but we can also measure the concentration of them, and that's done using UV light to detect at a particular wavelength the individual compounds. Each compound has slightly different properties. But because of the issues in the past with potential fraud, there's a suite of other tests, including tests for compounds such as leptosperin, which is a marker that's unique to the nectar of Leptospermum sciparium. We can trace then the honey back to its botanical origin, the plant that it came from.
When you pick up a jar of Manuka honey, the markers can be confusing. So how do you know that it's the real deal?
So in some cases they're labelling for the concentration of a compound, so MgO 300 would indicate 300 milligrams of methyl glyoxal in that particular pot of honey per kilogram, to NPA, which is non-peroxide activity. Now that's related to the methyl glyoxal concentration, but it's a more direct measure of the antimicrobial activity of the honey. Other marks, such as UMF, are quality mark, that if you can see a particular stamp on a product that it's been tested and assured to a certain standard, so that's different to actually labelling it with the concentration of a particular compound.
Another factor that's driving up the price is the use of Manuka honey in health and beauty products. Its antibacterial and anti-inflammatory properties are said to soothe and nourish the skin, and it's also said to help with blemishes and acne. But is that really the case?
There's been a number of studies that have tried to determine the health benefits of Manuka honey, and there are some very positive results, and certainly in terms of antimicrobial activity we can show that Manuka honey has antimicrobial activity in the laboratory. Those clinical trials over a long period of time have not been undertaken as of yet, but there are lots of reports that indicate that Manuka honey has benefits, but as yet unproven.
So the jury's still out on Manuka's medicinal properties, but that hasn't stopped its popularity, and Manuka honey is serious business. The prices and demand for the honey are so high that the New Zealand police have received hundreds of reports of beehives or honey being stolen, and even reports of bees being poisoned. So if you do manage to get your hands on a jar, does it actually taste different from normal honey?
smells delicious. The flavour is really strong.
It's very thick compared to normal honey.
It's got a kind of chestnutty flavour. It's not as sweet as usual honey. It's really smooth.
And the taste is pretty similar to what I'm used to. The texture is really interesting. It's very, very thick, almost like creamy.
Is Manuka honey really worth 100 times more than other honey? That's for you to judge. But what's for certain is that no other honey in the world is so rare and unique that it needs to pass by a lab before being sold.
The complexity of this soy sauce is achieved by fermenting it for days and aging it for years. This traditional recipe allows the company to create flavors that aren't possible in mass-produced soy sauces.
実際僕もこの会社入って初ソセっていうものを舐めた時にすごい衝撃を受けたというか、普通の醤油って結構なんて言うんでしょう、辛いものであったりとかしょっぱいっていう表し方をするんですけど、そうじゃなくてまず酸味がくるんですよね、口の中に。
High quality soy sauce starts with its most basic ingredient, soybeans. This never-ending cloud streams from the machine, steaming soybeans inside.
はじめ朝この中に水が入ってたんですけど、その中の水を全部出すのと冷たいもともとあった空気と今入れてるあったかい蒸気を全部入れ替えるために。
It's a seemingly simple first step that can make or break the entire product.
これが冷たい空気が中にある状態で飴を蒸しちゃうと豆自体が蒸し蒸れ出来上がりの醤油の味が変わってくる。
After 18 hours soaking and steaming, the beans should be soft and ready.
蒸し上がりいいと思います。しっかり中まで火が通ってるので、いい麹ができることに期待してます。
To turn steamed soybeans into the one-of-a-kind koji, the beans have to be combined with barley and mold spores. First, Tepe prepares the barley in a dry room, dusted with finely ground wheat.
結構機械麹はどちらかというと麦が粗いですね。
Unlike other soy sauce breweries, Gamebishi grinds it down to fine powder.
多分こんな感じなんですけど、粗いと、豆に対してのまぶりつきが範囲が狭くなっちゃうので。
Tepe mixes koji mold spores into the ground barley. Then, the steamed soybeans are hand-tossed with the barley and koji powder. The mold produces enzymes that break down the proteins and starches in the beans and barley into amino acids and sugars. It's this natural fermentation process that gives artisanal Japanese soy sauce its dark color and distinct flavor.
機械に一度挑戦したところ、どうしても同じ味が出ないということが、試験的に分かりまして。
Kaori Okada is the current owner of Gamebishi. She's the 18th generation of her family to run this business. Gamebishi is one of the few breweries in the world that still uses the traditional mushiro koji method.
むしろの上に麹を並べて、3日3晩熱の番をして作るという方法です。
Workers monitor the temperature of the koji every hour during that time.
今日寝れないじゃないですか。そうですね。一応明日の明けで、僕は仕事の方終わりなんで。
On the first day, Tepe heats the room to raise the koji's temperature.
で上の方なんかは 0.5 度1度ずつぐらいですけど、12時に盛り込んだ時点より、温度が上がってきてます。
The goal in this step is to heat the koji to stimulate fermentation. By day 2, the fermentation should be so active that the koji generates its own heat.
今はもうストーブつけない状態でも、だいたい麹の温度が31とかもう。
As it grows, the koji gets so big it needs to be shaken off the mats, dumped to the floor, and remixed to make sure the beans don't stick to each other.
だから酵素の力が強いと分解力が強いので当然うまい醤になるってことなんですよね。
The koji ages in these barrels where it will transform completely.
一応ここがもろみ蔵になるんですけど、
Moromi is the name of the paste-like mixture that will age into the finished soy sauce. It's a mixture of koji, salt, and water. Adding salt isn't just for flavor. Salt protects the koji from microorganisms and bacteria while it ages in cedarwood barrels.
仕込んだ後はやっぱり塩水と麹をなじますために、頻繁に攪拌は買い入れはしてやるんですけど、
But as it ages, they leave it alone, except for occasional stirring during the hotter months.
夏場はやっぱり表面に酵母っていうのが出てくるので、それは醤油にとってはあまり良くないものになってくるので、夏場は週に 3,4 回とかする時もあります。一応これが、先週仕込んだばかりの、麹になります。やっぱり、見てわかるように表面が、黄金色といいますか、黄色いっぽい色をしてます。古くなるとやっぱり酸化して色がついてくるので。
これちなみに今飛び込むと沈みます？それとも全然沈まないですか？こんくらいだと。
じっくり沈んでいくと思います。じんわり。
時からその酵素の力によって大豆のタンパク質が分解されてうまみになり、小麦のでんぷん質が分解されて糖になって。
Kamabishi ages all of its soy sauces. The longer they age, the more complex the flavors, and the more expensive the final product.
私どもは短い年数のものでも2年、長いものだと20年という。
Kamabishi even has plans for a 50-year aged soy sauce, which won't be ready until around 2032.
この中で一番古いもろみはこちらのもろみが、今だいたい41年なってますね。想像してもらいたいのは、バルサミコとかそういう醸造物に似てるんですけど、年数が経てば経つほど酸味が増してきますね。
But before the sauce can be bottled and sold, it first must be pressed. Mature moromi aged under 10 years is spread out on cloth and stacked into layers.
ノートにはこの作業をずっとやること、船かけをノートって言ってますけど。
Then a machine squeezes the soy sauce into a bucket below.
多分800リッターぐらいは今日だけでも絞れると思いますけどね。
But anything aged over 10 years is too dry to press this way.
1本作るのに言ったら1ヶ月以上かかるようなそういう商品です。塩ビのポールに、穴を先の方に開けまして、そこにガーゼをします。でそこにこう牛乳瓶みたいな瓶を、下につけまして、いわゆるそれでこうバーッとこう押して中に埋めるんですね、瓶を。でその埋められた瓶が、浸透圧によってこう、ガーゼのところからポタポタって1滴ずつ
The finished sauce is then heated up to stop the fermentation and to pasteurize it for bottling.
残念ながらもうお醤油は売れない、消費量はかなり低迷しております。
So when she took over from her sister in 2001, Kaori started innovating to bolster the historic company.
まずはその、粉のお醤油、洋食にも使えるようにということで、いわゆる芯を広げましょうということですね。
They even make pizza.
あとナポリからピザ窯を取り寄せまして、ここでピザを皆さんに振る舞うという醤油ピザを振る舞うということもやりましたし、
The company's roots are baked into its name.
亀さんとひしっていうのは、大変めでたい、アイテムですので、昔の多分岡田家の先祖が亀が好きだったというのもありますし、もともとは、4代目までは武士だったんですけれども、5代目の方が、1753年、醤油醸造業を始めたというふうに文献で読みました。なんといってももう日本で 3K と言われてもいいぐらいの、大変過酷な作業です。ですので今の若い人にとってはなかなか続けていくことは難しく、その同族で経営していくっていうことに対してはあまり、深く考えていませんで。
She felt similarly about her own foray into the business.
その16代目の彼から、私が自信がないということを彼に伝えましたところ、それなら閉めたらいいと、幕を閉じましょうということになったんですが、なんとかベストを尽くしてやってみようというところが、姉がいなくなってからそこから奮起していろんな、資格を取り、勉強をして、今に至っております。
A gallon of printer ink can cost you $12,000. When in cartridge form, it's more expensive than vintage champagne and even human blood. In fact, it can be cheaper to buy an entire printer than it is to purchase new ink cartridges. So why is printer ink so expensive? Let's start with the first printers. No, not that far. No. Come on. There we go. Inkjet printers were first developed in the 1960s, and early computer inks were made from food dye and water. Because of this, they would fade after a few months. So companies had to develop a dye that gave permanent photographic quality. In 1988, Hewlett-Packard achieved just that, with the first mass-market inkjet printer, which sold for about $1,000. But a lot has changed since then. Today, you can buy a brand new printer for around $35, but there's a catch. When the ink runs out in one of these printers, you need to buy specific cartridges, and these cartridges are expensive. So why are the cartridges so pricey?
Oh, that's simple. Greed and an outdated razor and blades model.
This is David Connett. He's the former editor of The Recycler and has been lobbying for change in the printer ink industry for years.
They sell the printers cheap. They sell the consumables at a very expensive price, and basically it's a formula. The cheaper the printer, the more expensive the consumables.
Once you've bought a printer that uses cartridges, you're trapped in a cycle. You have no choice but to buy them or throw away your printer. As a printer is typically a one-time purchase, companies don't mind selling them at a loss and making the money back through cartridge sales. The HP Envy 4520 all-in-one printer, for example, sells for $70, but is estimated to cost $120 to manufacture. The loss they make on printers means that companies need to sell ink cartridges to make a profit. And this model has led to a battleground between printer manufacturers and third-party ink suppliers. The companies do everything they can to keep you buying official ink cartridges. Manufacturers install microchips into their cartridges and frequently issue firmware updates to prevent the use of third-party ink, which can be more affordable.
Last year, almost 900 firmware upgrades were issued by just 9 printer manufacturers. So that's almost 3 a day. I mean, that's just like either absolute incompetence because you've got to do it so much, or it is a definite stealth tactic to control the market.
Printer companies attribute the high costs to the research and development that goes into perfecting printer ink. The materials they use, however, cost very little.
The manufacturing cost of ink is between 20 and 40 euros a litre.
And a lot of the ink you buy never even gets used for printing. According to a 2018 test by Consumer Reports, more than half the ink you buy could end up lost in maintenance cycles for cleaning the printheads. And printers that use multiple colour ink cartridges also stop working as soon as one colour runs out, even if the other colours are still full. These days, you're getting even less for your money. While the cartridges themselves are the same size and price, they often contain far less ink inside than they used to. The ink in many manufacturers' cartridges has shrunk from 20ml to around 5ml over the past few years, without any reduction in price. The original size 20ml cartridges are often still on sale, but are often sold as extra large cartridges for even more money, and some new cartridges can have as little as 3 millilitres of ink inside. Some companies have now even started ink subscriptions, deactivating your cartridges remotely if you print more than your allocated pages. Laser printers offer a lower cost alternative to inkjet, but produce a lower quality printed image. The real solution for many, though, would be to offer more efficient ink cartridges.
This product, can be better engineered. They could liaise with the aftermarket to actually, find a solution that works for everybody, because this is bad for the consumer because it's overpriced and expensive, and it's bad for the environment because it doesn't need to be made that way.
You can buy a bottle of sake for less than $10, but the most expensive version of the highest grade, called Junmai Daiginjo, can cost almost $10,000. Sake requires just 4 ingredients, but without careful attention, the brew can be ruined at any stage. At Nizawa Brewery, Nanami Watanabe observes the entire process. She's one of the youngest brewmasters in Japan.
結局その短大生だったので、就職を決めたタイミングではお酒を飲める年じゃなかったんですね。
Despite her age, her sake has already won several awards.
人によってはその正解がないことにストレスを感じてしまう方もいるとは思うんですけど、やっぱりその美味しいにゴールがないのは私は面白いなと思っています。
We spent a day with Nanami to discover how she brews sake and to learn about what makes Junmai Daiginjo so expensive. It's a quiet morning in the mountain town of Kawasaki, in Japan's Miyagi prefecture. But inside the brewery, the hustle has already begun.
そうですね、朝帯の子たちは割と5時から来て、ただ5時から来たら昼の12時には終わりなので、お酒作りは一人では絶対できないので、私が全部決めていくっていうことも、一つその方向性を決める上では大事だと思うんですけれども、やっぱりその働きがいだったりとかやりがいの部分にもつながってくるので。
例えばご自分のことすごい勉強家だと思いますか？
いえいえ、全然。どちらかというと早く帰りたいしできればやっぱりなんて言うんでしょう、あんまりいっぱい働きたくないので美味しくするためにはここは手を抜いてはいけない、ここはしっかり毎日やらなきゃいけないっていうこともあるので、勤勉ではないんですけど、やっぱりその目的が割とはっきりしてるかなとは思います。
Sake is categorized by its ingredients and the degree of rice polishing, also referred to as the rice polishing ratio. To be considered Junmai Daiginjo, at least 50% of the grain must be removed through polishing. The more polished the rice, the longer the sake takes to make, and the more expensive the final product. The brewery uses around 12 metric tons of unpolished rice per week. To polish rice, brewers run it through mills that remove the sides of the grain, which contain proteins and fats.
皮の中で石がコロコロくるくる回っていくように、ですから外側が入った時の味わいと中側だけの味わいっていうのが全く違うんです。なので、目的の味とするために磨いた方がいいのか、磨かない方がいいのか。
Compared to the umami flavour of sake made from less polished rice, more polishing generally means a cleaner taste and a more expensive price point. But before it can be fermented, it has to be washed and steamed.
お米にどのくらい水分を吸わせるかによってお米のその蒸し上がりの硬さが決まってくるんですね。お米の周りについている、お米の粉ですね、ぬかをしっかり落としてあげないと栄養分が多すぎてその目的のお酒にならなかったりとかしてしまうので、結構後味すっきり軽めの仕上がりにしたいので。
Workers move quickly because every moment counts when washing rice.
その時間だったりお米の状態を見ながら水分量を決めていくのは結構大切な工程になります。もともと13分くらいで吸水させるっていう目安をしてたんですけれど、今日の白米の状態から吸水の状態を見て、ちょっと吸うのが早かったので、じゃあ10分くらい10分ちょっとだけども開けようかっていうので今水を流した感じですね。
Now it's time to steam the rice that workers washed yesterday.
うちの蔵だと1トンから 1.3 トンくらいの仕込みが多いです。
Steaming takes around 40 to 45 minutes, and just like washing, it requires close attention.
釜ごとにやっぱりこう水分入る水分だったり、その張り込む順番の下の方だけ水分よく吸う釜だったりとか、その機材の癖みたいなのがやっぱりどうしてもあると思うので、もう少し経つと真ん中からこうバーッと蒸気が抜けて布が膨らんでる状態になるのが見れると思います。
お酒造りは全てがその判断の連続で、だからこその杜氏の腕なんです。
For Iwao, promoting Nanami to brewmaster at a young age wasn't much of a risk.
彼女を22歳の時に杜氏にしようと思ったのかというのは、一番はやっぱり利き酒能力。彼女と僕の利き酒のレベルが一緒だった。これはちょっとショックでした。で、あとは認めなくてはいけないことでした。
Nanami has been working at this brewery for 7 years.
そういう文化があるっていうことも知らないままこう入社を決めてしまったところはあったんですけど、本当に皆さんよく知ってくださって、なんかちょっと言い方合ってるかわからないんですけど、失敗しやすい環境かなとは思います。
It takes roughly 2 kilos of rice to make a 1.8 litre bottle of sake. Many different types of rice can be used, which affect the taste and the price. Nizawa Brewery sources most of its rice locally.
大きく影響します。ただ飲んでこの米だということはわからないんですよね。ちょっと余談なんですけど、よくお酒を飲んでこれはこの米を使ってるなんていうシーンがあるんですが、飲んではわからないです。
While ordinary Junmai Daiginjo sake uses rice polished to at least 50%, Nizawa's most expensive sake is polished to less than 1%.
でもちろん磨いたお米の 99% も、家畜の餌、あと米油の原料、あとおせんべいの原料 100% 使うんですね。なので産廃物が出ないというのがこの日本酒の製造の伝統産業のいいところであります。
Polishing rice to 50% takes around 3 days, but to get to 1%, it takes over 200 days. The process requires more rice and slower, more careful polishing. Nizawa makes around 1,000 bottles of this type of sake each year, and Iwao says they always sell out.
まあ普通お料理でもお酒でもプロなので、だいたい味の想像ってつくんですが、その想像を軽く超えていきます。
But polishing is just the beginning. Once the rice is steamed, it's time to add the most important ingredient: Goji mold spores. koji is a type of mold that grows on steamed rice. As the spores grow, they convert the starches in the rice into sugars. But workers have to move quickly to maintain the correct temperature and humidity. They feel for warm and cold areas of the rice and move clumps around to keep the temperature even.
繁殖していく人数が増えていくので発酵熱、熱を持ち始めるんですね。日本酒作りの麹、いい麹を作るには40度から43度くらい、45度までいっちゃうとちょっとあれなので、やっぱり対生き物なので絶対に自分が思った通りにいかないところですかね。その都度その都度のやっぱり気づきとそれに対しての対応力が試される毎日っていうのが、しかもそれが正解かどうかはわからないんです、口に入るまでっていうのが面白みでもあり大変さというか難しさでもあるのかなと思っています。失敗をやっぱり笑い話にできるまでが失敗。
Once the koji is ready, Nanami combines everything in large fermentation tanks.
お酒を作る際の原材料は、お米と、お水とあと菌2種類ですね。麹菌と酵母菌です。ワインだったりビールだったりとかはその1種類の菌が働き終わってから次の菌が働いたりとかするんですけど、日本酒の場合は2つの菌が同時に、働いてスタートするっていうのが。
Koji turns starches into sugars, and the yeast converts those sugars into alcohol. This process is called multiple parallel fermentation. It's what makes sake unique. It's also what makes brewing it so challenging. Nanami monitors this liquid, called mash, every day for a month. There's a lot of anticipation waiting to taste the sake. She takes samples and uses sensors to track the fermentation.
どういうアプローチをするといいのかっていうのを経過を見ながら考えて、例えば濃すぎる数字が出てしまっているもろみに関しては水を少し足してあげた方が酵母が生きやすくなるというか、やっぱり微生物も今になってもやっぱ予想外の動きをしたり逆に助けてもらったりとか、そういうことは結構あります。
After it ferments, the mash is pressed and bottled as sake. But no matter the price of the bottle, Nanami ensures every sip is delicious.
私が自分で作ったというか自分の製品をやっぱりどこで飲んでも美味しくあってほしいなっていう気持ちはあって、良いものを作りたいというよりは飲んだ時にやっぱ美味しくあってほしいっていう気持ちが強いので。
For Nanami, training her palate is just as important as honing her brewing skills. After work, she often tastes sake from other breweries.
会社で嗅ぐ匂いだったり会社で利き酒するのはもうなんていうか仕事の側面が結構やっぱり大きいので、割と緊張感を持ってというか、ご飲食店さんだったりとか自宅で飲むのとはやっぱ違いますね。
Nanami ordered 9 kinds of sake, but she doesn't know which is which.
ちょっと一番最初なので、まず全体的な香りを見ながら似てるものだったりとかそういうのを仕分けをしながら今口慣らしをしたような感じです。結構人によりけりで飲んじゃう子は全部飲むし、 お料理を食べながらまた飲んでいったり、あとはお酒の温度が上がってくると感じ方が変わってくるので、それもこう加味しながらなんでしょう、普通に飲んだり食べたりしながら評価をしていって、ちょっとこう甘さが強かったりとか、ちょっとこう麹の香りが強かったりとか、そういうものが何個か。
Despite sake's legacy in Japan, Nanami says it isn't always a drink of choice for people her age.
すごい好きで飲む子か、逆にもう全然飲まない子か、みんなに飲んでほしいというよりは、割とこうなんでしょう、美味しく飲んでほしいって気持ちが強いかもしれないです。苦手な人に無理に飲んでほしいとも思わないですし、美味しいなって思ってもらえる人にやっぱ飲んでほしい。でもそういう人たちってやっぱりファンって厳しいじゃないですか。厳しい目線で見て、いやでもやっぱり美味しいよって言ってもらえるのがやっぱ一番の褒め言葉なのかなと思います。
Tasting sake in a restaurant while eating allows Nanami to experience it the same way a customer would.
やっぱりお腹いっぱいになってくると、こうさっきはこう渋いというか、ちょっと糖分少なめだなって感じてた子たちが割とその軽やかというか、口の中の油だったり甘さを流してくれるので、評価がこうちょっとずつ上がってきたりとか。
Now it's time to check how many she got right.
ありがとうございます。なるほど。だいたい当たったんですけど、1個逆にしました。やっぱりその口当たりの滑らかさというか、スムースさみたいなのはやっぱりこう自分の蔵はあるなっていうのをすごく感じました。勉強に対しての新沢のその投資能力というかが結構高いので、自己研鑽に対してのそのチャレンジに対してすごくそのしやすい環境、しやすい職場だったかなとは思います。
Niizawa Brewery has been around for 150 years. Iwao Niizawa is the fifth generation to run it.
100年、200年、300年続く蔵がたくさんあるので、もちろんいい時ばかりじゃありません。
At the age of 25, Iwao became a brewmaster. He dedicated himself to improving the quality of the sake and the brewery's sales. But in 2011, disaster struck. A magnitude 9 earthquake and the resulting tsunami devastated the northeastern coast of Japan.
結局は蔵は全壊をしまして、自分が住んでいる家も全て全壊になりました。酒蔵に勤めている蔵人の家族も流されたり、全てを失った時間でした。外から来てくれた酒蔵はお酒造りをし始めてくれました。その勢いに僕らは乗って、少しずつ元気が湧いてきました。明日、お米をふかすんだよと、お米を磨くんだよ、なんとなく少しずつ前に踏み出せた。
Since rebuilding, Niizawa has won numerous awards for its sake, and Iwao has passed the role of brewmaster to Nanami.
これから利き酒能力が上がる人間と利き酒能力が落ちる人間が同点だった場合、早く判断しなければいけないと。
そうですね、そう思ってもらえたのは素直にありがたいかなと思います。でもなんか社長よりできるようになるかって言われるとちょっと分かんないですね。頑張ります。
The sun rises over this farm in Bulgaria's Rose Valley. But in this serene landscape, harvesters like Vegan have been rushing since 5 a.m. to collect as many roses as they can.
На един ден събирам 90 килограма, да.
They only have a few weeks until the roses wilt and become unusable. And a limited supply means a higher price tag.
Сега ще покажа. Това е цъфналото. Това не е.
The more flowers harvested in the morning hours, the better, because that's when the petals have the highest oil concentration. Bulgarian roses, also known as damask roses, have a particularly low oil content compared to other rose varieties, so it's vital to extract as much oil as possible. Once there are enough bags of roses to fill a truckload, they're delivered to the distillery. To extract the highest concentration of rose oil, the petals must be distilled immediately after harvesting.
Дистилацията не само на същия ден, не може 2-3 часа не може да стои, за да може маслото да е качествено, рандемана да е добър, миризмата да е добра, да е ароматна и така нататък.
The longer producers wait, the less potent and therefore less valuable their oil becomes. AgroProduct employs about 120 people during the brief harvesting season and says it spends an average of $8,000 per kilo of oil on labour. But that kilo can be sold for more than 1.5 times that amount.
See, it's only very few here, because as soon as they have a little truckload, we have the truck just behind us there, they are taken to the factory right away. So this is very important, especially in Bulgaria. They're very good at that.
That's Christophe Lodamiel. He's a master perfumer who's created scents for brands like Ralph Lauren and Tom Ford. He's at the distillery today on a consulting visit.
They take those bags and we can see that little truck going to the factory, and they're going to be extracted right away, because it does make a difference if you wait 1 or 2 days, etc.
Once the roses arrive at the distillery, workers must move quickly. They weigh the petals and pour them into the distillation vat. Thousands of soft pink petals are mixed with water and boiled down to this colourless sludge.
Розовото масло, за да стане не за да стане, за да е по-скъпо, това е защото ние се трудим повече, повече хора ни трябва за полето, за да оберат в по-малко време от часове, повече свят, за да дойде по-бързо в дистилерията, за да може да изваряваме.
Every part of this process is controlled. The steam is exactly 105 degrees Celsius and the pressure at 5.5 bar gauge. AgroProduct says these measurements optimize the quality of its rose oil, and the consistency makes its product more reliable. The mixture flows through several distillation apparatuses before the oil can finally be separated from the water. For a single kilogram of rose oil, producers need to harvest and process as much as 5,000 kilograms of Bulgarian rose petals.
You see this bottle right here? This is what you get if you harvest this during a whole season from 3 rows. You get just this bottle. 1 kilo is this. So 4 of those goes in here. Voila.
Bulgarian rose oil is sought after by established luxury fragrance houses such as Tom Ford and Louis Vuitton, as well as newer shops like Gloss Moderne.
The rose is a rose is a rose, unless of course it's a Bulgarian rose. So we've smelled a lot of different roses, and I actually wasn't a fan of too many different rose fragrances before. I felt like they smelled like my grandmother, and so when we smelled this, it actually smelled like as if you had a bouquet of roses, and it smelled like a fresh rose.
So, here we are. So this is the production that just happened. It's straight from the factory in this raw bottle. This is so potent. This is, I find, always magical when it's really fresh. So some of it is a bit offensive, like stringent or almost aggressive, because it's so fresh. And then in the older one, the aged one, it's like a nice wine.
Tremendous difference.
Yeah, bon. Hopefully, because that's what we tell everybody.
After the oil has been aged for at least 3 months, it can finally be incorporated into perfumes. Kuen says the unique scent profile of Bulgarian rose oil makes it worthy of its high price point.
We pay between $10,000 to $15,000 per kilo for Bulgarian rose oil. And that's the pure Bulgarian rose oil, undiluted. I feel it's definitely worth the price. It's extremely unique.
Studies have found more than 300 compounds in damask rose oil, making it more complex than other varieties. The damask rose, or Rosa damascena, originated in the Middle East, where its oil has been extracted since the 7th century. Around 400 years ago, the farmers began cultivating these roses in what's now known as Bulgaria's Rose Valley.
And this is one particular thing about this valley, is that it's cold and wet. If you look at other rose regions in the world, some are cold but dry, some are not as high as here. So this is very particular of this terroir here in Bulgaria and gives this richness of the oil.
The cooler spring temperatures prevent the rose petals from forming a protective wax, and the humidity allows higher oil saturation in the rose. This year, the season was delayed a couple of weeks because of unexpected rainfall and colder than usual temperatures. Ironically, humidity and cool temperatures are two of the factors that make Bulgarian roses stand out from others. Then there's the soil.
Тук самата почва е бедна почва, камениста почва. Затова прави по-специфична и миризмата и аромата на розата по-хубава. Затова се казва, това е течното злато на България.
Plus, the Damascenian rose has all these spicy and fruity notes. So they are very well preserved around here. And this is one reason why we like this Bulgarian rose.
There is no sign of Bulgarian rose oil's global demand slowing down. The rose oil market is estimated to expand at a compound annual growth rate of 6.8% between 2019 and 2025. Organic rose oil, like that produced by Agroproduct, is the fastest growing segment.
Второ, света върви, тенденцията е за производство на биологични продукти. Безвредно, няма химия, няма торове вътре и така нататък. И след това направих голяма дистилерия, която в момента работи изцяло 100% само биологични масла и води.
But the scent is what will keep perfumers like Christophe coming back for more.
I don't know, I said already, it's one of those notes, you put it in almost anything, it makes it nicer. We had a joke with some other perfumers. We know we have one or two rose qualities. We know, well, just put that, just put a little bit, just a little bit, and clack, it gives either sparkle or body to a fragrance. So it's really nice.
This bluish liquid is one of the most expensive resources in the world. No, it's not the blue milk from Star Wars. It's actually blood from a horseshoe crab. And the stuff this blood makes costs $60,000 a gallon. So why is it so expensive? And who's buying horseshoe crab blood? The blue color comes from copper in the blood. But that's not its most interesting feature. The blood contains a special clotting agent. It's used to make a concoction called limulus amoebocyte lysate, or LAL. Before LAL, scientists had no easy way of knowing whether a vaccine or medical tool was contaminated with bacteria, like E. coli or Salmonella. Scientists would inject vaccines into huge numbers of rabbits and then basically wait for symptoms to show up. But when LAL was approved for use in 1970, it changed everything. Drop a minuscule amount of it onto a medical device or vaccine, and the LAL will encase any gram-negative bacteria in a jelly cocoon. While it can't kill the bacteria, the jelly seal is like a fire alarm, alerting us to the presence of what could become a potentially lethal infection and prevent it from spreading. Each year, the medical industry catches around 600,000 horseshoe crabs. The crabs are drained of 30% of their blood, and up to 30% of the crabs don't live through the process. The survivors are returned to the water, but no one really knows how well or if they recover. In 2016, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature bumped the American horseshoe crab up to vulnerable on its red list, one step below endangered. And the US population could keep falling by as much as 30% over the next 40 years. LAL labs claim that the returned crabs eventually recover, but new evidence suggests that's not always the case. Wynne Watson is trying to figure out what happens to the crabs when they're put back in the sea.
So the most immediate negative effect is mortality. Anywhere from 10 to 25% of the animals will die within the first couple of days after you bleed them.
Bled crabs become disoriented and weak for a period of time, and females may have trouble spawning.
If they survive the first, I'll say 2 weeks, and they're back in their natural habitat, they did pretty well.
But it's getting through those 2 weeks that's the issue.
Based on our data and others, I think that you need to treat them a little. If you're going to get increase your survival rate, right, you need to treat them better.
Scientists are trying to find a synthetic alternative to help reduce the strain on the horseshoe crab population. But so far, LAL is still required by the FDA for this type of testing. So if these animals really aren't recovering at the rate companies previously thought, we might eventually run out of crabs to bleed. If that happens, our lives, and the lives of countless rabbits, might be at risk.
Over the past 50 years, single malts have become increasingly popular. Scottish single malt exports grew by 14.2% in 2017 to just over $1.5 billion. One of the main players in the single malt market is Glenfiddich, whose parent company achieved a £1.2 billion turnover last year.
Selling 1.2 million 9-litre cases of Glenfiddich around the world. We have 180 markets around the world that we generally service. In 1963, we started to commercially sell single malt, but also to promote it actively outside of Scotland. We gave the single malt category the biggest push it's ever had in its life.
We were fortunate enough to try a 12-year-old bottle worth $36 and a 50-year-old vintage worth $30,000.
Nice, sweet, soft.
The 12-year-old whiskey was certainly sweet and pleasant to drink, but I was expecting the more expensive bottle to taste out of this world to justify its price.
Oh, wow. Really distinct.
You can taste much more European oak in this one.
The distinction between the flavours, like it's a lot smoother and a lot oakier.
There seems to be truth that the longer the alcohol is in there, the smoother it tastes, so the more deserving of the expensive price. But that can't be the only thing that justifies one bottle being close to $29,000 more than another. Another reason is that making single malt is an extremely difficult process to get right. Barley is ground down and added to spring water. Heated to 64 degrees Celsius, it turns to sugar, dissolving into a fine sweet tangy liquid called wort. The wort is drained, cooled and passed into wash bags. This is heated and condensed in copper wash stills for its first distillation, and a second time in spirit stills. The spirit trickles into the spirit safe, ready for maturation, and then is batched in casks with spring water. Casks spend years in the warehouse, maturing into a single malt.
So the secret to the quality of single malt is consistency. You've got to nail down your production so that your new make spirit comes off exactly the same. And we have a spirit quality team that are actively looking at, and we also know the new make spirit on site as well.
But there's more. An age 30 maturation can have 30 to 40% of the alcohol evaporated in the barrel, or 1% each year of the whiskey's life. This is because of something called angel share, the natural evaporation of the liquid into the atmosphere over time. So older whiskies are expensive not just because they're old, but because there's less of them left. There's one more factor we haven't touched upon yet: status.
It's all about the equity of the brand, the perception of the consumer about how much they're prepared to pay for our brands. I think in general younger people want quality, they want good shoes, good clothes, nice cars, nice houses, and they want to be drinking single malt.
And it's not just store-bought bottles. One factor that's driving up the price of single malts is a booming collector's market. A bottle of the Macallan 1926 60-year-old recently sold for $1.5 million in auction, marking the largest single sale ever for a bottle. Christie's International Director of Wine, Tim Tiptree, oversaw the sale.
It was one of 40 bottles produced from a single cask that was distilled in 1926 and then bottled in 1986. Was a hand-painted bottle, so I think it does add a little to the desirability, but it's the intrinsic quality of the whisky inside the bottle that is driving the demand.
But Scotch has some serious competitors. Alongside China, India, Taiwan, Ireland, Japan is one of the world's major producers of unblended whiskies.
For relaxing times, make it Suntory time.
You might have heard of Suntory time. Suntory owned the Yamazaki distillery in Osaka Prefecture. The rarity of their produce drove prices sky high.
And the Japanese have come to the fore. About 4 or 5 years ago, one of their whiskies, a Yamazaki, was made best whiskey in the world. And that created a lot of noise around the Yamazaki single malt. But Yamazaki is owned by Suntory, and the bulk of what they produce goes to blends. So they had insufficient whiskey in their warehouses to actually continue on the success of what Yamazaki achieved in that 1 year. What dictates the price, the value of a whiskey sometimes is the exclusivity. So the less there was, it drove the price up to the point where Yamazaki was being sold off at 3-4 times the normal value.
But blended whiskies can also reach quite a high price. Will they ever be as expensive as single malt?
We don't predominantly sell much blended whiskies in our auctions. Single malts are much more rare, they're much more individualistic, so whereas blended whiskies is typically sort of generally more produced in larger volumes and also is more homogeneous in the actual style and taste profile.
This lab is one of the only places in Australia milking snakes.
My mum, in particular, thinks I'm a lunatic because I wanted to do this for a job.
Billy cares for 300 deadly snakes.
Coastal taipans, eastern browns, tiger snakes, common death adders, and king browns.
First, he prepares the milking cup.
So if you went to a nightclub or a pub and you asked for a shot, like Fireball, this is what they give it into. I know of a fellow that was bitten by a large coastal taipan. Within about 15 minutes, he was showing symptoms. He was extremely nauseous, vomiting, sweating, and by the 20-minute mark, he was almost unconscious. He was bleeding out of his eyes, his gums, every orifice in his body. He was in a coma for 11 days, but he did survive that bite. So this is a tiger snake. So these guys are literally one of the most toxic snakes on the planet. And you can see I'm using the snake hook here to keep the head away from my hand and the rest of my body. And when we're coming into the milking process, basically I drop the hook like that. I have the snake in my right hand. We've got a soft pinning pad there. So this is basically like a foam mattress. I've got my pinning device, which is a clear perspex disc. So what we do is we flick the snake onto the pinning pad like that, apply the pinner, and I can see exactly where its head is, and I can have my fingers right there ready to go. And so that's the snake restrained. And the next part is where I actually milk the snake. So what he's going to do is he's going to think he's bitten me. There we go. Nice yield there. And that amount of venom, that's enough to kill over 50 adult men.
There are about 600 species of venomous snakes around the world. Concentrated in these hotspots, Australia is home to more than 100 of them.
Australia's got more venomous snakes than non-venomous snakes. We're the only country in the world with that.
Each snake's venom is made up of a unique cocktail of toxins that attack your body. A king cobra's venom often goes after the nervous system and can kill a human in 15 minutes. A viper's venom can stop blood from clotting and cause internal bleeding. And in rare cases, bites can stop your heart. Each week, Billy milks over 100 different snakes, including this coastal taipan, one of the most dangerous in Australia. Its venom could cause paralysis,
Taipans are so reactive and they're so smart and calculated. They do make me very nervous to work with. And you can see there an absolutely massive yield, and that amount of venom there is enough to kill a couple of hundred grown men, no worries. So once we milk the snakes, we then freeze it, just in a basic freezer. So the venoms are stored with the different species, and you'll notice taipan venom, once it's frozen, is actually pink. So all the different species have actually got different coloured venom. And down here, we've got the tiger snake, and you can see it's like a light yellowy sort of a colour. Eastern brown's clear. The king brown is a really rich, deep, dark yellow, like you can see here. A few months later, when we've got enough together, we'll actually freeze dry it. We turn this on, we set it to minus 56 degrees Celsius, and basically it freezes, freeze dries, and draws all that moisture out within about 48 hours, and we're left with this crystallized product.
Freeze-dried venom is easier to transport and lasts longer. Billy says the venom from his lab has saved over 250,000 lives in Australia.
It's a huge weight on our shoulders, but we're all extremely passionate and proud of the work we do here.
But snakes aren't the only animals needed. Horses are also key to making antivenom.
We're producing a medication, so the horses need to be healthy, need to be in a good body condition.
Mauricio Guardas is in charge of the farm run by Instituto Clodomiro Picado, Central America's only supplier of antivenom. His team injects horses with small doses of venom. It's important they're precise. Too much could hurt the horse.
It's a very dangerous process. We need to be really careful with everything that we do here.
The horses will begin to produce antibodies, which will eventually become antivenom. The healthier the horse, the more antibodies they produce. Mauricio's team collects their blood every 2 weeks. They wash and shave the horse's neck to prevent infection. Then they extract blood from the horse's jugular vein. It takes less than half an hour to collect 6 liters. Just one blood bag is worth over $500.
We separate the plasma, and from the plasma, we separate the antibodies, and that's what you get injected if you get bitten by a snake.
Scientists have used horse blood to make treatments since the 1800s. Inspired by vaccine science of the era, the French Dr. Albert Calmette injected cobra venom into rabbits and horses. He used their blood to make an early version of antivenom. Animals like horses are still used today because they have a lot of blood to produce antibodies at scale.
We're producing a medication that's able to save lives. It's something that's very appealing and very rewarding.
This lab, 9 miles away, receives the plasma from the farm and converts it into antivenom that's safe to inject into humans. It can protect against a wide variety of snakes, but it doesn't come cheap.
I will say that the cost of production will be around maybe $15 to $20, something like that.
The lab produces roughly 120,000 vials a year. They end up across the Americas and Africa.
Depending on the snake, we may require between 10 or 20 vials per person.
The sooner a victim is treated, the more likely they are to survive and recover quickly. It's a recovery David Williams of the World Health Organization knows well. He has survived 6 snake bites in his life.
The product we used in Papua New Guinea, we had a survival rate of nearly 99%.
But not everyone has access to quality antivenom. and as many as 137,000 people die from snake bites each year. And there could be thousands more unreported. Every year, there are an estimated 58,000 snakebite deaths in India alone. The Irulod Cooperative collects most of India's venom. It pays its members to catch snakes, nearly $30 for a spectacled cobra, or about $3.50 for a saw-scaled viper seen here. The cooperative collects venom from India's 4 most dangerous snakes, which is blended together to make one antivenom. But roughly 65% of India's population lives in rural areas, far from city hospitals, making it hard to get antivenom to victims in time. The same problem exists in sub-Saharan Africa, where as many as 30,000 people die a year from snake bites. Many victims don't go to hospitals, so the data is hard to track.
As the world doesn't look at this problem, it is the poor person at the end of the line in the community that cannot afford it that's the person that's bitten.
Before his death in 2019, Royan Taylor dedicated his life to improving antivenom access for poor rural communities in Kenya.
There is a need for antivenom because we don't have enough antivenom now.
Alvia Ndonge's child was bitten in Kitui County, Kenya, about 100 miles east of Nairobi.
Ilikaa black mpaka ikaanza kuoza yenyewe, akaanza kutoa ile harufu ya kuoza. Sasa daktari akasema lazima hiyo kidole ikatolewe ndio isiharibu mkono yote.
The county has to use a motorcycle ambulance to get some victims to hospitals. But not everyone gets medical help in time. Wendy Kalonzo's child died after a snake bit her in the middle of the night.
Niliamkia asubuhi nikaenda mtoni nikashota maji. Kurudi nilipatana na ule msichana wangu mkubwa. Kaniambia mtoto kutoka asubuhi hajaamka.
The Kenya Snakebite Research and Intervention Center hopes to develop the first antivenom in East Africa.
No one has produced any kind of antivenom in Kenya. We call it African purfura. This is the most common snake we come across in Africa. It seems to bite many people.
It's also one of the most deadly on the continent. In sub-Saharan Africa, the most effective treatment for a snakebite can cost more than $100 a vial, and victims sometimes need more than 10 of them.
Many of the people who get bitten are breadwinners. So, if they're in a hospital bed, their family's going hungry.
Many victims couldn't afford treatments, so some manufacturers stopped producing antivenom for sub-Saharan Africa altogether. Today, there's a dire shortage of quality antivenom. The Kenya Intervention Center has a database of venom from local snakes, but hasn't been able to set up a horse farm or antivenom lab yet.
You need to have the land, you need to maintain the land, the pastures, do all the maintenance.
To set up an antivenom manufacturing facility to the right specifications is going to cost somewhere between 10 and 30 million US dollars.
A few countries have greatly reduced their death rates, thanks in part to government investment. In Costa Rica, just 1 to 2 people die each year from snake bites. Australia's death count is just as low. Both countries have free antivenom treatment.
Most places worldwide, you have to pay for antivenom, and it is unbelievably expensive. So here in Australia, we are unbelievably lucky that the government looks after us in that way.
These are some interesting ones, yeah.
Researchers like Matthias Bittenbinder are trying to make antivenom cheaper and more accessible. His work is partly funded by the Naturalis Museum, which preserves 30,000 snakes for research.
Some of the jars are over 100, 150 years old. This is a really interesting species. This is the Russell's viper, and this is one of the species that is most heavily feared in India, and also one of the species that we're studying in our lab.
Matthias is researching ways to produce antibodies in a lab, which would eliminate horses from the process and require less venom from live snakes.
You're not using the animals as the factories to produce the antibodies. You could produce them in bulk in the lab. So we're standing now in front of our chamber of secrets. And in here, this is where we keep our snake venoms.
He's studying how venom affects the human cells in this well plate.
We have a venom of a rattlesnake, which we know is capable of destroying the cells. We can see these very prominent holes. So you can imagine that when you get bitten by a rattlesnake and then their venom's caused to punch holes in your blood vessels, then you will bleed out from the inside.
Matthias hopes his research will help scientists develop an oral tablet that would work on all snake bites.
It could be the Holy Grail, which makes it possible to neutralize the effects of all the different snake species.
That would make it easier to get treatment to victims in rural communities hit hardest.
This is my hope, and to be able to study these magnificent creatures and their effects, but also to help the people that need it the most.
Scorpions are almost always milked by hand, one by one. And one scorpion produces, at the most, just 2 milligrams of venom at a time. So let's do the math. If you owned one scorpion, you would have to milk it 2.64 million times to fill a gallon. And let's face it, you'd probably get stung along the way as well. One sting isn't enough to kill a healthy human, but I think it hurts.
I'd easily put it being 100 times more painful than a bee sting, but because pain is a subjective and emotional experience, it's difficult to really get a quantification on that. But it's definitely going to ruin your day.
That's Venom Tech founder Steve Trim, one of the few people brave enough to deal with these animals. That's because inside that deadly venom, there's actually tons of useful components that are helping pioneer breakthrough medicines. Chlorotoxins, for example, are the perfect size to bind with certain cancer cells in the brain and spine, which is helpful for identifying the specific size and location of tumors. And researchers have used scorpion to eliminate malaria in mosquitoes. Kaleotoxin has been given to rats to fight bone disease. Scientists hope it could work in humans too. These are just a few of the medical benefits that researchers have found in scorpion venom. And the more they research it, the more uses they find, which means demand for this miracle venom continues to grow. So scientists are now trying to figure out ways to get more of it faster. Like this group out of Morocco who invented the first remote-controlled machine for milking scorpions. It can safely milk up to 4 scorpions at a time. Might not sound like much, but it's 4 times faster than a human. Scientists hope to get on the market within a few years, making the whole process faster and safer. Faster and safer, you're probably thinking, maybe I should start my own scorpion farm. Well, get in line, wise guy.
There clearly has been a surge in people thinking, this is a get-rich-quick scheme, but with people not understanding how scorpion venom's used. We have seen a rise in the number of people saying they've got 300 grams of scorpion venom. Do we want to buy it? And the answer is no, we've got our own.
Depending on the stallion, horse semen is one of the most expensive liquids on the planet.
Thinking about it again, starting to draw. Yeah, okay, can wash that. Good boy. Okay, grab that rein inside, Josh. Got him? Toy there. So we collected about 80 mils, and this is going to be worth in excess of $100,000.
That means that a gallon of this horse's semen is worth $4.7 million. And that's nowhere near the most expensive. Once it's collected, horse semen can be separated and sold in small tubes called straws.
One of these straws is worth about $1,200. We're putting about 150 million to 200 million sperm cells in each individual straw. Big Star's produced about 60 or 70 of them here.
Super fertile stallions like Big Star can ejaculate once a day. Theoretically, this means he could produce over $20 million worth of semen during an 8-month stud season. And if a stallion's semen is high quality, it can be frozen in straws for future use.
So in this room is the heart of really Stallion AI services. This room's built like actually a nuclear bunker in here. This is where all the semen is now kept. We've got hundreds and hundreds of thousands of straws in here. We've got over 1,200 different stallions. So in here, stored at minus 196 degrees, is hundreds of millions of dollars worth of semen ready to be used to inseminate mares.
In the horse breeding world, genetics is king. Wealthy investors are willing to pay high prices for proven winners' semen, hoping that the resulting foal provides a large return on investment.
Big Star is one of the most prolific show jumpers of all time. He's a double gold medal winning stallion, which there's very few of them out there. He's got the perfect genetics ready to go on show jumping. So you mix that with another genetic line on the female side and cross those two together. You can pay $1,200 for a single straw, you can have a foal, and maybe 3 or 4 years later, you can sell that foal for sometimes $100,000. And in Big Star's case, he's hit those bells. He had the highest price foal in the UK, and that sold for in excess of $100,000.
Even though most stud farms offer guarantees on producing a live foal, commercial and competitive success is still a gamble, even with strong genetics. In fact, the bloodline of all stallion horses is closer than you might think. According to an international team of scientists who studied the Y chromosomes of 52 horses from 21 breeds, practically all modern horses descended from just a few original stallions. From carriage horses hauling tourists in the streets, right through to champion racehorses like Galileo, the world's most expensive sire. Even more surprisingly, 95% of all thoroughbred racehorses like him can be traced back to just a handful of ancestors, who are all linked to one single super stud, the Darley Arabian, born in 1700. But the value of thoroughbred semen is a little harder to quantify, since breeding must occur naturally for racehorses.
The sport horse world, we're very lucky we can use artificial insemination to breed our mares with, as opposed to thoroughbred world, everything's got to be done naturally. They've got to literally cover the mare naturally. They're concerned with their gene pool. If they would allow AI into the thoroughbred world, it would mean the gene pool would shrink because one horse could then cover thousands of mares.
And anyone wishing to naturally cover their mare with Galileo needs serious financial backing. Even though his price is listed as private, it's widely reported that his stud fee sits at around $650,000, comfortably the world's highest. But because thoroughbred horses must be bred naturally, and therefore a collection of sperm cannot be purchased, equating the cost of Galileo's semen requires some extrapolation. Assuming that during the course of a natural covering, Galileo ejaculates the average of 50 ml of semen, and assuming that the semen is high enough quality to impregnate a mare successfully, and assuming that a breeder paid $650,000 for that service, then we can deduce that a gallon of Galileo's semen could be worth a whopping $49 million, making it the most expensive liquid on Earth. But is it worth it?
Like anything, there's a lot of work, there's a lot of luck in it, but you've got to make your luck and you've got to start off with the right genetics. The chances, obviously, you need to breed a lot to get that particular horse, but with the right genetics, you've got a much better chance.
Galileo's position as the top sire is cemented by the achievements of his offspring. He has sired no less than 84 winners, including Frankel, who himself has now been put to stud, commanding the second highest stud fee in the UK, of around $220,000. In turn, he has sired a further 10 winners. Like father, like son. Despite generally being safer for both stallion and mare, artificial insemination is criticised for its ethics around science and nature. But the analysis of thoroughbred racehorse genetics has added to the controversy surrounding horse breeding. Roughly 10% experience orthopaedic problems, and the majority suffer exercise-induced bleeding in the lungs. PETA investigators captured video from inside the breeding barns at Darley in Kentucky, one of the world's most expensive thoroughbred breeding facilities, where stallions were goaded to cover more than 100 mares each in a breeding season. Some thoroughbreds were even sold for slaughter at a horse meat market. With so much money to be made in racing, show jumping, dressage and more, the price of horse semen will remain stable